did not scream. Years afterward, when the memory came back to her in the hollow hours before dawn, that was the part Rosamund Carew remembered most clearly. Not his face, not the fire gone low in the grate. It was the way she had gone on, standing in the doorway of the upstairs parlor, one hand still raised and not yet fallen, and felt the whole world rearrange itself around her without making any sound at all. Inside, the candles had burned down near their sockets. In that amber light stood the man she was to marry in 19 hours, and her sister Cordelia, her fingers closed on the lapels of his coat. He did not see her. Cordelia did. She looked straight at her sister with those pale eyes, and did not draw her hands away, and did not say anything. 3 seconds,
but I don't want to wait
4.
until tomorrow.
Then
I want
Rosamund
it now,
stepped back.
If you think that.
She shut the door with the smallest sound she could manage, walked the length of the corridor, went down the great staircase of Renmore House, drew the betrothal ring off her finger, and set it on the silver tray beside the entrance. The night porter nodded to her. She nodded back. Then she walked out into the September rain, no coat, no bag, no word to anyone in that house. She did not scream. She was simply no longer there. And for 5 years, England believed that was the end of it. But when she passed through the gates of Renmore House that night, Rosamund Carew carried 2 things out with her that nobody inside knew about. One of them she would hide for the next 5 years. The other, she did not yet know herself. She had reached the turnpike at Kensington before the practical part of her mind caught up, and it caught up in the form of a single flat fact. She had no money. She stopped under the lamp and made an inventory of herself, which took very little time. A silk gown ruined at the hem, slippers, a shawl she must have taken off the hall chair without noticing. And then her fingers went to her ears and found the garnet drops still in them. And she stood in the rain and laughed once, without any pleasure in it, because that was the thing about a life like hers. You could walk out of a duke's house at midnight and still be wearing 3 months of a laborer's wages on either side of your head. In the morning, she sold them to a jeweler on the Brompton Road. He looked at her wet hem and her bare left hand and priced her accordingly. And she took what he offered without arguing, because arguing meant staying, and staying meant being found. £19 and 4 shillings. It bought her a seat on the Western mails and the right not to explain herself to anybody. West because she had no plan at all. West because she had a name. Jory Tregarthen had been her father's groom until January of the previous year, when the Earl of Sandmere turned him off without a character for a reason Rosamund had time not to examine too closely. She had watched from the morning room window as he crossed the stable yard with his box on his shoulder. He had stopped and looked up, and instead of the bitterness she had braced, for he had told her quite simply where he was going, a village on the south coast of Cornwall, past Falmouth, where the pilchard boats went out. "If ever you've need of it, my lady," an absurd thing to say to an earl's daughter. She had thought so at the time and had thanked him and gone on with her day. Porthgowan. It was the only place in England that belonged to nobody she was running from. The journey took a month. Coach to Exeter, coach to Plymouth, a carrier's cart to Truro when the money began to thin, and the last of it on foot along the coast, rode in second-hand boots made for a larger woman. She came over the final rise on an afternoon in the middle of October, and Porthgowan lay below her in the failing light, like something the sea had put down and forgotten to collect. 40 whitewashed cottages, a stone quay, a huddle of masts, and beyond it the whole gray shifting weight of the water. She stood on the hill for a long time. Something in her chest went quiet. She did not go to the Tregarthens. She told herself it was because she had no wish to bring trouble to a family that had already had trouble enough on her account. And there was truth in that, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she was not yet able to say her own name aloud to anyone who might have heard it before. So she gave the village a different one. Ruth Pascoe, her mother's name, stripped of everything that had been attached to it afterward. And she asked, in the doorway of the net loft, whether anybody had work for a pair of hands. Somebody did. 4.5 years later, on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of June, Ruth Pascoe stood at the front of the Porthgowan schoolhouse and considered the question of Edwin's arithmetic. The arithmetic itself was correct. What was in dispute was the state of the page, which appeared to have survived some kind of maritime disaster. Ink across the margin, a long smeared thumbprint down the side of the column where he had leaned on the answer before it dried, and a small additional drawing near the bottom which, on inspection, was a seagull. Net. "It's right, though," said her son, from the second bench with total confidence. "It is right so." So, a man who cannot be read is a man who has not said anything. She turned the page toward him. "Do it again, not because it is wrong, because I should like to be able to see it." He came up to take the slate back, and on the way stopped to look at the smear with proprietary interest, as though it had been done by somebody else and he were merely admiring the work. 4 years old that Thursday, both of them. He had her coloring and none of her stillness, and he moved through a room the way weather moves through a valley, which is to say that nothing in it was quite where it had been afterward. The other one had not looked up in a quarter of an hour. Ambrose sat at the end of the same bench with his elbows squared and his head bent, working through the exercise she had set the older children an account of the tides, in your own words. And no more than 1 page, and when she came to stand behind him, she saw that he had covered the page and had begun ruling a margin on the back of it, and that what he had written was not what she had asked for. He had not described the tides. He had described the harbor at 7 o'clock and at 1 o'clock on 4 separate days, with the depth at the quay steps marked each time in the number of stone courses showing above the water, which he could only have known by going down and counting. Then, at the bottom, in his careful upright hand, "It is not the same amount every day. I do not know why yet." "Ambrose, I ran out of room," he said without apology. "That is not what I asked you for." "No," he agreed. He thought about it. "But it is what I found out." Ruth Pascoe stood behind her son with her hand flat on the desk and said none of the several things that came to her, because most of them would have given something away. What she said was that he might use the back of the page, and that when he found out why, she would like to be told. Ambrose nodded once and went on ruling his margin as though the conversation had been a formality they had both agreed to get through. She had not meant to become a schoolmistress. For the first 2 years she had mended nets and taken in washing from the 2 houses in the village grand enough to send any out, and had been adequate at both. It was Elias Verrall who found her out, over a fish buyer's bill. She had been standing on the quay behind Nancarrow's cellar in the spring of '48, and the buyer had read the figures aloud, and she had said, without particularly meaning to, that he had read the 3rd line wrong, and it was 11 shillings and not 8. Verrall had been standing 4 feet away and had been schoolmaster in Porthgowan for 31 years. He came to her cottage that evening and asked her to read a page of Bunyan aloud, and she read it, and then he asked her politely, with his hat in his hands, nothing at all about where she had learned. That was the beginning of her real education in Cornwall, that a man could hold a question in his mouth for 3 years and decline to spit it out. He hired her that autumn, and gave her the school entire in the summer of 1850, when his knees settled the argument, and took the vestry seat his retirement entitled him to, and came up the hill once a month to look at the register and disagree with her about Ambrose. Below the windows the village went about its June. The pilchards would not come in earnest until August, when the hewer went up onto the cliff with his furze bush and stood for whole days watching the water for the red shadow, and eventually raised the cry that emptied every cottage in Porthgowan in under 4 minutes. But the boats were out on other business, and the place smelled as it always smelled, of salt and tar and yesterday's fish. Copper had been falling for 3 years, and the mines up the coast had begun to let men go in 10s and then in 20s. And on the door of Mrs. Bosanko's inn there was a printed bill offering an assisted passage to South Australia to able men and their families, with the wages at the Burra Copper Works set out in a column down the side in figures no man in Porthgowan could argue with. 3 families had gone in the spring. The bill had been up since March, and nobody had taken it down. At 11:30, the door of the schoolhouse opened without a knock, and Loveday Tregarthen stood in it, holding the frame with one hand and getting her breath back with the other. Mrs. Tregarthen was 63, and had climbed the hill too fast, which she did about once a year, and always for the same reason. "There's a carriage," she said. Ruth did not look up from the register. "Whose? That's the thing of it." Mrs. Tregarthen came 2 steps into the room. "London plate. 2 men riding behind. And it's come down the coast road and not the Truro road, which means it's been stopping." She paused for effect, which was her privilege. "It's been in Garan, and it's been in Portlow, is what Jenner's boy says, and it's been asking." The pen in Ruth Pascoe's hand did not stop exactly. It finished the word it was in the middle of, which was Truan, and then it stood still on the page while a small blot spread out from the nib and ruined the entry. "Asking what?" she said. He didn't know. Asking after a person. Behind her, at the end of the second bench, Ambrose Pascoe went on ruling his margin, and his brother went on drawing a second and better seagull in the corner of a slate that would have to be cleaned before anybody saw it. She sent the children out at 12, which was early, and stood at the window with her hands behind her back and watched the road. The carriage came into the square at 7 minutes past the hour. It was a traveling chariot, dark and unmarked, and it had been on the road long enough that the mud on it had dried and gone pale, and the 2 men behind it were not liveried, and none of that told her enough. Half of Porthgowan came out to look at it, because a vehicle of that class came down that road perhaps twice in a year, and the other half came out 4 minutes later because the first half had. The door opened, a man stepped down, and Rosamund Carew, who had not wept on the night she left, who had been delivered of 2 children in a midwife's back room outside Truro without making any sound that carried through the wall, who had built an entire life out of the silence she had chosen, put one hand flat against the cold glass of the schoolhouse window and found that she could not draw a full breath. He was changed. Not in his height, and not in the set of his shoulders, and not in the particular way he stood, as though the ground beneath him existed in order to accommodate him. Those things were exactly as they had been. What was gone was the ease. There had once been a carelessness in Nathaniel Ellsworth's face, the specific, unbothered confidence of a man who had never in his life been refused anything, and it was not there now. In its place was something scoured out. He looked like a man who had been searching for a very long time and had grown quietly, permanently furious with himself for having to look at all. He spoke to somebody in the square. A signer by the Guernsey Pengilly, she thought, or one of his brothers. The man listened and glanced up the hill and pointed. Ruth Pascoe stepped back from the window. She had 3 minutes. She used them. She gathered the loose slates and stacked them. She capped the ink. She closed the register with its ruined entry and squared it against the edge of the desk, and straightened the row of copybooks on the shelf, and did all of it at an even pace and in the correct order, because there was nothing left to decide and only the body to be got through the next quarter of an hour. Then she sat down in the chair behind the desk and folded her hands on the closed register and breathed. She was Ruth Pascoe. Her mother had been a Pascoe out of Gweek. She had come here in the autumn of '46 with nothing and mended nets for 2 years before Mr. Verrall found her. She taught 31 children to read and 9 of them to cipher. She lived in the second cottage from the harbor with the blue door. She had 2 sons and no husband, and the village had long ago finished having its opinion about that. She had nothing whatever to do with London, or with the House of Lords, or with an abbey in Wiltshire, or with the exact gray of a storm coming in off open water, which was a color she had been failing to forget for 4 years and 9 months, and which looked up at her every single morning out of 2 faces that were otherwise entirely her own. The footsteps came up the hill. They stopped outside the door. The knock, when it came, was firm. Not loud and not tentative either. It was the knock of a man who had rehearsed the moment more than once, and had settled, in the end, on the plainest version of it. "Come in," she said. The door opened, and Nathaniel Ellsworth walked into the Porthgowan schoolhouse. He brought with him the thing he had always brought into rooms, which was a kind of gravity, an adjustment in the air of a place that had nothing to do with how much noise he made. He had to stoop for the lintel. He did not appear to notice that he had. And then his face found hers across the scrubbed board floor, and for the space of one breath it came apart. What was underneath was raw and relieved and furious all at once, and it lasted perhaps a second and a half. And then he took hold of it again and set his jaw and said, in a voice carefully prepared and very nearly steady, "Hello, Rosamond." She looked at him. "You have the wrong village," she said. "My name is Ruth Pascoe." He came in and shut the door behind him. "I have had the wrong village for 4.5 years," he said. "I have stopped making that particular mistake." She had braced for shouting, and had been reinforcing that wall every autumn for 5 years, the ducal voice deployed as an instrument. The accounting of what her disappearance had cost him. The indignation of a man whose arrangements had been disordered. She had answers ready for all of it. What she had not prepared for was the quiet. He stayed where he was, just inside the door. He did not advance into the room. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has imagined so many times and in so many rooms that the actual object of it seems at first slightly impossible. "You're well," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm well." "You're thinner. You came to Cornwall to tell me that?" Something moved across his face, and it was almost the beginning of something. And then it thought better of itself and went. "I came because I need to speak with you. We have nothing to speak about." "We have a very great deal to speak about." He paused. "We can begin with why you left without a word." The gall of it went through her like cold water and left her, for the first time since the carriage had come into the square, entirely clear. "You know why I left. I know what you saw," he said. "I know what it looked like from a doorway at midnight. I also know that it was not what it appeared to be, and I have had 5 years in which to consider how badly I would take being told that if I were you." "Then don't tell me." "I am going to tell you," he said, "because you are owed it. Whether or not you want it is a separate matter, and I will not pretend they are the same." She stood up behind the desk. She had not meant to. It simply happened, the way one stands when a room has become too small. "I want you to leave," she said. "I want you to get back into that carriage and go up the coast road and not come down it again. I have a life here. It is a good one. It is entirely mine. Whatever you have come to say or reclaim or demand, the thing you are asking after does not exist anymore. It stopped existing in that doorway 5 years ago." Every word of it was true. She believed all of it, and she was aware. standing there in a room that smelled of chalk and damp wool, with the sea moving below the window. Precisely how tall he was, and precisely how familiar the line of his jaw was, and precisely what it was costing her to keep 4 feet of floor between them. He did not leave. He did not move at all. "Where are the children?" he said. The silence that came down was the loudest thing Rosamond had ever heard. She had been careful. 5 years of care, worn smooth by daily use. A different name. A village at the end of a road that went nowhere else. A midwife 30 miles off who had asked nothing. A neighbor who minded the boys twice a week and had never in 4 years asked her a single question she could not answer. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Mrs. Tregarthen has them," he said. "The house with the yellow lichen on the slates at the top of the second lane. I asked a man on the quay who minded the schoolmistress's children, and he told me, because there was no reason on earth for him not to." He said it gently. That was somehow far worse than if he had said it as a threat. "I found the woman who delivered you," he went on. "I did not find her by asking for your name, because I did not expect your name to be any use. I asked in every parish between the Fal and the Fowey whether anybody remembered twins born in the summer of '47 to a woman who came alone." He took a slow breath. "In the whole of that country," he said, "there was one answer. A woman named Keziah Bly, outside Truro, who has kept her mouth shut for 4 years and did not open it for me until I told her what I had been told in 1849. Her hands had gone very still at her sides. "How old are they?" he said. It was the longest pause of her life. "4, she said. "They were 4 last Thursday." She watched it go through him. She watched the arithmetic complete itself behind his eyes, and then the meaning arrive after the arithmetic, the way thunder arrives after light, and then the weight of 4 years settled down across his shoulders like something he had been carrying blind for a long while and had only by now been shown the name of. "Are they mine?" She should have denied it. She had rehearsed the denial and had maintained the whole architecture of it, the way other women maintained linen, a brief, unfortunate attachment in her first winter here, a name she could produce if pressed, a set of dates that could be made to look ambiguous if she angled them properly. She had gone over it so often that it had acquired the smoothness of something true. She thought of Ned counting the stone courses of the quay for his brother, because his brother had asked him to. She thought of the exact gray of 2 pairs of eyes looking up at her out of the dark every morning of her life. "Yes," she said. The word went down between them like a stone into still water, and for a moment nothing at all happened. Then Nathaniel Ellsworth, 6th Duke of Renmore, who had held himself together since entering the room by what was plainly a continuous effort, put one hand on the back of the nearest bench and stood there. His eyes closed for the length of 3 breaths. When he opened them, they were wet, and Rosamond looked away, at the window, at the gray line of the water, because she could not bear any part of it, not the grief in his face, not the complicated landslide going on inside her own chest, not the terrible tender fact that some portion of her had wanted him to know for 4 years, and another portion had been perfectly certain that keeping him ignorant was the only thing standing between her sons and the world that had broken her. "I want to see them," he said. "I know, Rosamond. I need to see them. I know that too." She turned back. "But you will tell me what happened in that room first. All of it in order, and not the version you have made comfortable for yourself over 5 years. I will decide afterward what my children are told and when. Not you." He held her eyes for a long moment, then he nodded once slowly. "Yes," he said, "that is right." She made him sit down, and there was nowhere but the benches. So he sat on one, a man of 32 folded onto a plank bench built for 8-year-olds, his knees not far below the level of the table. It was an indignity, and he bore it without a word, and Rosamond resented him quite specifically for that. "Before the rest of it," she said. "How did you know to look at all? You had 5 years." "Why the February before last?" "Because somebody wrote to me." "Who?" "I have no idea." He reached inside his coat and took out a pocketbook, and out of the pocketbook a fold of paper, worn soft along the creases, and he put it on the table and pushed it across. It came to Renmore Abbey with the second post. No cover, no direction beyond my name, no hand I knew. It was in the middle of a stack of tenancy papers, and I very nearly burned it with the rest. She unfolded it. 3 words, in a small hand that was trying not to be a hand at all. "She is alive." Rosamond looked at it for some time. "Somebody knows," she said. "Somebody knew enough to be certain of that, and not enough to tell me where, or they would have told me where." He took the paper back and folded it and put it away with a care that she noticed and did not comment on. "I have carried it since February of last year. I have taken it out 100 times to make sure it still says what it says." "And before February of last year?" "Before February of last year," he said, "I was not looking for you." "No," she said. "I imagine you were not." "I imagine you were." "I was not looking for you," he said, "because I believed you were dead." The room went out from under her. She sat down. She had not intended that either. "That is the part I have come to tell you," he said. "And it is going to be worse than you are expecting. So I would rather do it now than let you go on, assuming I simply could not be troubled." He began with the parlor, because she had told him to begin at the beginning, and he did not attempt to make any of it flattering to himself. Cordelia had come to Renmore House that evening on foot, alone, at 11:15, which in itself ought to have told him something. She had been 18 that September, and she had a habit, carried since childhood, of taking hold of the nearest available person whenever she was frightened. She had done it to her father's chaplain. She had done it once memorably to a bishop. She had come with a letter in her hand, having found something in Gideon Carew's writing desk that she believed her sister needed to know, and having spent 3 days failing to work herself up to saying it directly, and she had settled at last on the worst available substitute, at the worst hour, in the worst manner, weeping and gripping his lapels and saying over and over that Rosamond must not be told by their father. What was in the letter? She would not give it to me. She would not say. She got as far as the word Scotland, and then she heard something in the corridor and stopped. He looked at his hands. I had my hand in her hair. I want to say it plainly, because you saw it, and because you were entitled to draw the conclusion you drew. She was 18 and shaking, and I did what one does with a frightened child, and it was your sister. And it was the night before our wedding, and I did it in a lit room with the door shut. And I have thought about that door a very great deal since. You did not come after me, no. For 3 days you did not come after me. No. Why pride, he said. The word sat there. I did not know you had seen us, he said. I learned that in the morning from the ring on the tray, and even then I told myself it might mean something else. And when it became clear, it did not. I decided that you had lost your nerve. That is the honest shape of it. I decided that a woman who could walk out of my house without speaking to me could come back into it the same way, and that I would not go chasing her across 3 counties in front of my own servants. I was 27, and I had never in my life been left. 3 days. 3 days, he said. On the 4th I went to your father. She was very still now. He was extremely kind to me, said Nathaniel. I remember that particularly. He gave me brandy. He said he had been dreading having to tell me, and that you had gone abroad, and that there was a man, he did not name him. He only let me understand there was one, and that the family would of course make whatever reparation I thought proper. And you believed him. I believed him, he said, because it explained the ring, and because the alternative was that I had done something. Yes, I believed him. She got up and went to the window because she could not stay in the chair, and stood with her back to the room and her arms folded, looking at the water. "That is 46, she said. "That accounts for 1 year of 5. "Yes, go on." "In September of 49, he said, your father wrote and asked me to come to Sandmere Court. It was the height of the cholera. There were something over 50,000 dead in England and Wales that year, and the parish registers were 3 months behind everywhere south of the river. He was in mourning. He had a paper for me." He stopped. "Say it," she said. "He gave me a certificate of your death," said Nathaniel, "registered in Deptford. The 28th of September, 1849. Cholera morbus, signed by a physician whose name meant nothing to me then and means a great deal to me now. He told me you had come back into England in the spring under another name that he had known and had not told me because he could not bear to, and that you had died in a lodging house south of the river before he could get to you. He wept. He wept in front of me, and I had never seen him do that, and I took it for grief." Rosamond did not turn around. "There was no grave marked," he went on, "because there were 400 in that ground that autumn, and half of them went in without names on the board. I went down in the November. I went again the following year, and again the year after that in the frost, and walked the north side of that burial ground, counting mounds, because I had got it into my head if I could establish how many there were, I might narrow it, which is not a rational thing to do, and I did it for 3 winters. The sea went on doing what the sea did. Somebody bought that certificate," he said. "A physician does not put his hand to a death he has not seen for nothing. I did not think of that once in 2 years, because it did not occur to me that a man might buy his own daughter's death, and because I was—" He stopped, "because I was glad in a way I have not admitted to anybody, to have an answer that was not my fault." Rosamond stood at the window a long time. When she spoke at last, her voice was perfectly level, and it was the levelness of it that would come back to him afterward, in London, in a room with a red-robed judge in it, when he tried to explain to Everard Sowerby what kind of woman he was asking him to act for. "My father," she said. Nathaniel Ellsworth had been in a great many rooms in his life and had never once been afraid of one. He was afraid of this one. It was small and low, and had a bread oven in the wall and a dresser with a cracked jug on it, and the light through the small window had gone the color it went, on that coast in June, warm and sideways. And he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand and understood that whatever happened in the next 2 minutes was going to be permanent. Mrs. Tregarthen had opened the door, looked past Rosamond at the large, expensive stranger on her step, and exhibited the specific grace of a Cornish woman who has lived long enough to recognize a complicated thing and decline to make it more so. "They're in the kitchen," she had said. "Quiet one's been drawing. Loud one's been after my jam." And now here they were. The quiet one sat at the table with a stub of pencil and a sheet of paper that had already been used on the other side, working at something with his shoulders squared and his whole face gathered in. The loud one was on a stool by the larder with one arm, still up to the elbow in a place it had no business being, and he had frozen entirely at the sound of adults, and had arranged his features into the expression of a boy who has not been doing anything at all. "Ned," said Rosamond. "I wasn't. You absolutely were." She crossed the room and kissed the top of his head and lifted him down off the stool as though he weighed nothing. And Nathaniel heard the sound he made himself only afterward, when he was going over it, a small sound, hardly anything, the kind a man makes when he is struck somewhere he has not braced. Both of them looked up. They had her coloring and her face, more or less, in 2 different arrangements of it, and they had his eyes. He had been told in a schoolhouse 2 hours before, and had believed it, and had spent the whole walk down the hill assembling himself for it. And none of that was worth anything, because knowing a thing and being looked at by it are not the same transaction. They looked at him with his own eyes, and his own expression in them, that measured gray assessment he had watched his mother deploy across dinner tables for 30 years and had absolutely no idea they were doing it. His jaw moved. Nothing came out of it. "Who are you?" said the quiet one. He put his hat down on the dresser because his hand had begun to be unreliable. Then he went down on one knee on the kitchen flagstones. It was not a decision. He was aware, in some remote committee room of his mind, that a man of his position did not kneel on other people's floors, and found that he did not care in the smallest degree. He knelt because the boy was small and had asked him a question, and it seemed intolerable to answer it from a height. "My name is Nathaniel," he said. It came out wrong. It came out slow and careful, the way a man says a word in a language he has only read, and the boy noticed he saw the boy notice and filed it somewhere. "I'm a friend of your mother's." The child considered him. It was not a child's consideration. It was thorough, unhurried, without self-consciousness, and it went on long enough that most grown men would have said something to break it. "You've got the same eyes as me and Ned," he observed. Nathaniel's breath stopped. "I know," he said. "Mama says our eyes are special." "They are," he said. "She's right." The other one had already crossed the kitchen and was standing close enough to touch, examining him with a frank total curiosity that had nothing guarded in it anywhere. "Are you very rich?" he said. "Ned," said Rosamond. "It's all right." Nathaniel's voice had gone rough somewhere in the last minute, and he could not get it back. He looked at the boy. "Yes, why I am." Ned thought about it. "You've got a big coat." "I have." Ambrose says big coats are for important people or cold people. A pause while both of them waited for him. "Which one are you?" And then something happened that Nathaniel Ellsworth had not expected and could not have prepared for. He laughed. Not the arrangement of the face he made at dinners, a real one, dragged out of him without permission, rough and cracked and entirely unguarded. And it went on longer than he meant it to, and he put one hand flat on the cold flagstone to steady himself against it. Both boys stared at him with enormous delight. Loveday Tregarthen, in the doorway behind, made a small sound that might have been satisfaction. He heard it as though from outside himself, and what shook him was not the sound but the age of it. He could not remember the last one. He knew he had laughed at some point in 5 years, in the way one knows one ate dinner on some particular Tuesday, but there was nothing there to find. When he could, he said cold, mostly. Ned nodded, satisfied that the world had been correctly catalogued, and put his hand flat on the sleeve of the coat to test the assertion, and left it there. Behind him, the quiet one had turned his paper around. "This is the harbor," said Ambrose. Nathaniel took it and looked at it for a long time, longer than adults look at children's drawings, which is about 3 seconds, and long enough that the boy began to shift. It was the harbor from up the hill above the school. The wall came out and hooked round the way the wall did. The masts were the right height against the roofs, and the roofs stepped down the slope in the right order. And the boy had worked out without being told that things further off are smaller, and that the water does not go dark all the way to the edge. "You see things very clearly," Nathaniel said. Ambrose said nothing at all, but he took the paper back and put it down and squared it against the edge of the table so that it lay straight, and did not draw anything else on it that evening. He stayed until dark, which she had not planned for. She had imagined it going one of 2 ways. Either he would see them and be satisfied and go back up the coast road, or he would see them and demand something she could not give, and they would have the argument she had been rehearsing since 1847. What she had not imagined was the third thing. Ned climbed into his lap 11 minutes after meeting him, uninvited, in the manner of a boy taking possession of a chair. Ambrose brought the drawing back out, and then, having established that it would be looked at properly, brought out 2 more. And the Duke of Renmore sat down on Loveday Tregarthen's kitchen floor with his back against the dresser, and a child on each side of him, and answered, in order and at length, a series of questions concerning his horses, his house, the number of rooms in it, whether anybody had ever been lost in it, and whether he had ever seen a whale. He had, off Land's End, from a cutter, in 1839. The account took a quarter of an hour, and Ned made him do the size again twice. Rosamond stood by the window with a cup of tea she had not touched and watched a structure she had maintained for 5 years, built out of pain and pride and the daily unglamorous labor of staying alive in a place where nobody knew her, shift slightly on its foundations. She did not let it fall. She felt it move. She took the boys home at 9 and put them to bed, Ned asleep in the middle of a sentence about whales, Ambrose reading until she took the candle out of his hand. Then she came down and found Nathaniel outside the cottage door, with his back to her, looking at the dark water. She stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. Below, at the harbor, somebody was still working by lantern light on the far side of the quay. "I am not going to take them from you," he said. "If that is what you have been thinking since 2 o'clock, that is not the only thing I have been thinking." He turned his head. In the dark, with the wind off the sea, pulling at his coat, and his face stripped of the arrangement he wore in front of people, he looked a great deal more like the man she had agreed to marry than the stranger who had ducked under the schoolhouse lintel that afternoon. It was, she thought, distinctly unfair of him. "I have no right to ask for anything," he said. "I understand that. Not after 5 years, and not after." He stopped and started again. "But you should know that I am not leaving Porthgowan. Not this time. I waited 3 days once, and I have paid for it every day since, and I am done with leaving rooms to see whether anything happens in them. You have an estate. I have an agent, and a mother who is better at it than either of us, and a seat in a house that has risen for the summer." He said it evenly. "I will take a room at the inn. I will not press you, and I will not go near those boys again without your saying so, and I will not say one word to either of them about who I am until you tell me the day and the hour. But I am not going to disappear again, and I would rather you knew that now than found it out slowly." She looked at him for a long moment. "Mrs. Bosanko charges 3 shillings a night," she said, "and she waters the ale." He held her eyes. "I have slept in worse places," he said, looking for you. She turned away before whatever was happening in her face could finish arriving there. "Good night, Nathaniel." "Good night, Rosamond." She went in. She dropped the latch. She stood in the dark of her own small, honest, carefully assembled hall, with both hands flat against the wood of the door, and breathed. Outside, she heard him walk away, unhurried steps on the cobbles, going down toward the harbor lights. He had not pushed, he had not demanded. He had sat on a kitchen floor for 4 hours with his sons, and she still could not hold the fact steady for more than a few seconds together, and he had laughed, properly, in a way she suspected from the sound of it he had not done in a very long while. She was not going to let herself feel any of it, not until she knew what it cost, and whether the thing she had spent 5 years shielding 2 children from had actually changed, or whether she was about to make the same mistake twice, because a man had gray eyes and a real laugh and had come all the way to Cornwall. But her hands stayed where they were, and she did not move for a long time. By morning, the village had settled on its position, or rather on a dozen of them. Porthgowan was a place where a new set of nets warranted discussion across 3 consecutive breakfasts. a traveling chariot with London plates, 2 outriders, and a man whose coat had visibly cost more than the harbor master earned in a year was, by local standards, an event of historic proportions. Between her own door and the schoolhouse, 240 yards, Ruth Pascoe received 4 accounts of the stranger's appearance, 2 unsolicited opinions concerning his intentions, 1 offer of a bed in Gorin should she require to be elsewhere, and a warning. The warning came from Captain Jago Nancaro, who was 70, owned 2 seines and a share in a third, and divided the human race into those who worked and those who did not, having never in his life found a use for any other category. Grand London men, he said, bring trouble to small places. Yes, that's all I'll say on it. It was not all he said on it, but the remaining 4 minutes were a variation on the theme, and she thanked him and went up the hill. Nathaniel came at 11 with 2 cups of tea from the bakehouse on the quay and the expression of a man who has spent a night at Mrs. Bozanko's and has resolved to say nothing whatever about it. She does water the ale, he said. The tea is excellent. She let him in. He put 1 cup on her desk and took up a position by the window, standing, looking out at the water. And she recognized the habit with a small unpleasant jolt because it was her own, the thing she did when she needed to think, and the room was pressing in. You should understand what your staying does to me here, she said. My life in this village runs on a certain quiet. It runs on people having decided 4 years ago not to ask. I know it. You are the single most conspicuous object within 9 miles. The carriage is stabled at Regency and the men with it, he said. I have written to my mother that I am inspecting a mineral property, which she will not believe for a moment, but will repeat accurately, which is what I need. He turned from the window. I cannot undo 5 years of careful living by breakfast. I can decline to make it worse by Michaelmas. At noon, Elias Verrall came up the hill, which he was not due to do for a fortnight. He came in without knocking, being 66, and having built the school with his own subscription list, and he looked at the Duke of Renmore for some time with his hat still on. You'll be the gentleman, he said. I will. I'm on the vestry. I was master here 31 years. He did not offer his hand. I'll ask you something, and you may tell me to mind my own, and I'll go, and that will be an answer too. Ask. I stood on Kennington Common, said Verrall, on the 10th of April, 48, in the rain, with 150,000 others by our count and 20,000 by theirs, and the bridges held against us, and we went home. I've met dukes with good intentions since. 2 came down here and looked at the cottages and were very moved. He put his hands behind his back. Which sort are you? Rosamond watched Nathaniel take the question and decline, visibly, the 4 or 5 graceful ways out of it. Who buys the season here, he said. Fowey House, mostly. Sometimes a Genoa agent out of Falmouth. Then the price is set 30 miles away by 2 men who each know what the other has offered. And your captains find out what a season is worth after they have caught it. Nathaniel put his cup down. How much of the cellar and the press does Nancaro own outright? Half of one. Then he is not a fisherman. He is a tenant who happens to own a boat, said Nathaniel. I have 300 colliers in Somerset in the same position, and they are poorer every year for the same reason, and I did not understand why until I was 30. That is your answer, Mr. Verrall. I am the sort who did not understand it until he was 30. There was a silence. Verrall took his hat off. Well, he said. He mended the harbor wall on a Wednesday. The wall had wanted mending since the equinox gales, when a section on the seaward return had lost its top 3 courses, and the vestry had voted the money in March and then discovered, in the way of vestries, that the money had been voted twice for different things. So the gap stayed. Everybody walked past it and had an opinion about whose fault it was. Nathaniel came down at 7, in a coat borrowed off Mrs. Bosanko's late husband, and short in the arm, and asked Nancarrow's foreman where the stone was being kept. He worked until 4. He was not good at it, he was strong and willing, and had no idea what he was doing. And he spent the first 2 hours carrying, and the middle 2 being told, at length and with relish, exactly how wrong he had been about the carrying. But he did what he was told, and he did not stop when the tide turned and the wind came round and everybody's temper shortened. And at some point in the afternoon, somebody handed him the level and did not take it back. Within 24 hours, it was the most thoroughly discussed event in the recent memory of Porthgowan. Jago Nancarrow revised his position on Grand London men. He did it in the way of a man amending a ledger rather than changing his mind. "He works," he told Ruth Pascoe, in a tone that closed the subject. "Can't say worse of him than that." With the boys he was careful and patient, and she was obliged to admit it to herself, by the end of the first week remarkably good. He did not try too hard. That was the thing. She had braced for the other kind, the parent compressing 4 years into a fortnight, the gifts. The pressing enthusiasm children can smell at 50 yards. He did none of it. He appeared at intervals she had set, stayed the length of time she had said, and went away again, without making the going away significant. He learned that Ambrose answered questions and closed up understatements, that Ned was easier in motion than at rest, and a conversation on a walk would run 20 minutes, where the same one at a table died in 4, that both were more themselves within sight of the water, and that if he waited long enough on a Tuesday, Ambrose would bring out whatever he had been working on since Friday. She watched all of it, and it did things to her composure that she declined to examine. On a Sunday afternoon, she came down to the quay to collect them, and stopped on the harbor path because nobody had seen her yet. Ambrose was sitting on a capstan with the sketchbook on his knees, drawing the boats coming in, working fast because they would not hold still, and having plainly decided that this was the point. Ned was on Nathaniel's shoulders and was conducting. There was a dispute in progress on the far bollard, where a large herring gull with a bad wing and no fear of anything had taken up residence some months before and had been named by Ned, for reasons nobody had ever got out of him, the governor. 2 lesser gulls had made an attempt on the bollard and had been repelled. Ned was providing a running account of the engagement, with attributed dialogue, and Nathaniel stood at the water's edge, with both hands round the boy's ankles and his head tipped back, listening with the unhurried attention of a man who has found the exact place he wants to be and has no further business anywhere else. She let herself watch for 30 seconds longer than was sensible. Then she made herself walk forward. The letter came on the last day of June, and it was addressed to Mrs. Ruth Pascoe, Porthgowan, near Mevagissey, in a hand she had known since she was 9 years old. She sat down on the step with it. For a moment the only thing in her head was the mechanical question how, by what route, through whose mouth, and then it answered itself, because there was only one way anybody in England could have learned that name, and it was a man who had spent 17 months asking after her in every parish between 2 rivers, and had not been quiet about it. She broke the seal. The hand was Cordelia's and was not. It had the same long ascenders and the same impatient tail on the Y, and it shook. She did not read it standing up. She took it inside and sat at her own table with the door shut. Cordelia knew that he had found her. She had known he was looking, and had known for some months where the looking had got to, and did not explain how. She did not ask to be forgiven. She said twice that she was not asking to be forgiven, which Rosamond thought was very like her, since it managed to be an apology and a defense in the same 4 words. And then, in the middle of the second sheet, without any preparation, There are things you must hear from me before you hear them from him. Not from Nathaniel, I do not mean Nathaniel. There is a person who will come to you, and I think he will come soon, and he will be very courteous. And he will tell you what he wants you to believe about Papa and about me, and it will be near enough to true that you will not be able to take hold of it anywhere. I am not able to put it in a letter. I have tried 4 times. If you will let me come to you, I will come. And if you will not, I shall understand it, and I shall go on being what I have been for 5 years, which is of no use to anybody. There was no name. Rosamond read it 3 times, then folded it into the canister on the high shelf where she kept the rent, and went out and taught 31 children the difference between a peninsula and an isthmus, and at 4 o'clock came home and read it again. Nathaniel came at 6 to walk down and fetch the boys, and she stood in her own doorway with the letter in her apron pocket and did not tell him it existed. She could not entirely have said why. Part of it was that Cordelia had written to her and not to him, and that this was the first thing in 5 years that had belonged to her alone. Part of it was less creditable. He had told her a story about her sister in a schoolroom, and she had chosen to believe it, and belief taken on trust has a way of wanting evidence at inconvenient hours. But most of it was simpler and worse. Somebody is coming, her sister had written. And Rosamond had lived 4 years in a village at the end of a road with 2 boys and a locked door. And she knew exactly what she did when she was frightened. She had done it on a September night in 1846. She went quiet and she went alone, and she told nobody anything. She was still doing it. She could see herself doing it. She put the letter back in the canister anyway. He was at her door on the 9th of July. She saw the horse first, tied at the bottom of the lane where no one tied a horse, and then she saw him at the top of it, standing in her porch out of the wind with his hat in his hand, looking down the lane at her as she came up it with a basket on her arm and flour on her sleeve. He was near 50, lean in the face in the way of men who have been waiting a long time for something and have kept themselves ready for it. She had last seen him across a drawing room in April 1843, where he had asked her a question, and she had answered it in 4 words, and he had bowed and gone to the window and stood there a long while before rejoining the company. "Lady Rosamond," said Lord Stanmer. "Lord Stanmer!" How delightfully rustic. She got the key out and put it in the lock without looking at him. "Come in," she said. "The neighbors can hear everything that is said in that porch, and I would rather not give them the trouble of pretending they can't." He came in, and she watched him take inventory of her life with the unhurried thoroughness of a man valuing a lot at auction. The 2 shelves of books, the mended chair, the children's drawings pinned in a row above the fireplace, the good plates that were not good, and his eyes stopped there rather longer than anywhere else, the 2 small pairs of boots by the door. His expression arranged itself into something she recognized, and it took her a moment to name it, because she had not been shown it in 5 years. Pity, calculated, deployed, entirely deliberate. "You have made quite a life here," he said. "I have. A shame it cannot continue." She did not offer him a chair. "You understand my position," he said. "The Renmore succession is a matter of consequence, and not to me alone. 1,100 people on that estate, 4 collieries in Somerset, a seat in the Lords, none of it the private property of a man's sentiment. My cousin has formed an attachment to your situation. I do not doubt it is sincere. Sincerity is not a legal instrument. You have come a long way to tell me that. I have come a long way to make you an offer, and I would like you to hear the whole of it before you refuse it, because I think you are a clever woman, and I think you have already worked out most of what I am going to say." He turned his hat over in his hands. "Suppose he claims them publicly," he said. "What follows is not a wedding. It is a suit. And a suit of that kind takes years, and every year of it is conducted in public. Your name, your disappearance, where you were, and under what name, and in whose company, examined in every court, and every drawing room, and every newspaper in England, and examined again each time it came on." He looked up. "And your sons would eventually be old enough to read." The clock ticked. Outside, somebody's dog was making an issue of something. "I am prepared to make a private settlement," he said. "Generous, I will put a figure to it if you ask. Discreet, paid quarterly through a house in Truro, with no connection to my name or his. The boys would be provided for, educated, set up in whatever line they showed a turn for. Nobody need ever know anything at all. In exchange for your releasing my cousin from an attachment which is destroying him," said Stanmer, "and allowing a succession to proceed as it was always intended to proceed." Rosamund put the basket down on the table. "Lord Stanmer," she said, "when you asked me a question in my father's drawing room 8 years ago, do you remember what I said?" "Vividly. It has not changed, and neither have I. Take your hat." The door opened. Nathaniel came in with the evening behind him and read the room in a single sweep, his cousin by the fireplace, Rosamund standing between the two of them with her hand still flat on the table, and the particular quality of stillness in her shoulders that he had learned to interpret over the past three weeks, and that meant she was furious and was managing it. Something crossed his face. Then it was gone, and he was entirely composed. "Aubrey, cousin." If Stanmer was surprised, none of it reached the surface. "I was explaining the position to Lady Rosamund. I heard you explaining it." "I heard you from the lane." Nathaniel came fully into the room and closed the door behind him. "You have come to this woman's house and offered her money to keep my sons anonymous. I have offered her the only arrangement in which those children are not spent. Then let me tell you what will happen instead." Nathaniel's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I will claim them. I will do it publicly and legally and without apology, and I will spend every year I have left on it if I am obliged to, and if you choose to be the obstacle in front of that, I will make it the most expensive decision of your life." Rosamund stood very still. Because he had said "my sons" in front of a third party for the first time, and she had not been asked, and she did not know yet what she felt about it. Stanmer looked between them, and she saw she was watching for it, that he was not dismayed nor even inconvenienced. He was a man who had come to make an offer he had fully expected to be refused, and who had got, in exchange for the ride from Truro, a piece of information he wanted. "Well," he said, "that is clear enough." He put his hat on and went to the door, and he stopped beside her on his way out, and he spoke quietly, at a pitch pitched for one person. "You should ask your Duke," said Lord Stanmer, "what your father sold me in 48. Then he was gone down the lane, and the door stood open on the evening, and Rosamund turned round. Nathaniel was looking at her. "What did he say to you?" And she understood, from his face, before she had finished asking herself the question, that he had no idea. She gave him the letter in the carriage, somewhere east of Exeter, on the second morning. He read it twice. Then he sat with it open on his knee and looked out of the window at Devon going past, and did not say the thing she had spent 2 days preparing an answer to. "How long have you had it?" 11 days. "Right," he said, and gave it back to her. "That is all? What would you like me to say?" He looked at her. "That you should have shown me sooner? You should have shown me sooner. It would have made no difference. I could not have told you what he meant by 48 a fortnight ago, any more than I can now. And you have had 5 years of showing nobody anything, and that is not a habit a person puts down in a fortnight because a man has been polite for 3 weeks. She folded the letter and put it away. "She was right," Rosamund said. That is the part I cannot get round. She wrote and told me a courteous man was coming, and one came. Yes. Which means she knows what he wants me to believe, which means she knows what is true. Yes, said Nathaniel, it does. They had left the boys with Loveday Tregarthen, and Rosamond had spent the first 30 miles composing letters to them in her head that they could not have read, and the next 30 being angry at herself for it, and she had slept badly at Exeter and worse at Ilchester. Everard Sowerby met them at Reading. He was 58 and dry as a legal boxful of dust, and he had been a proctor in Doctors' Commons for 31 years, which meant that he practiced in the courts of the church, wills, and the matrimonial jurisdiction, and the small, strange body of law that governed whether people who believed themselves married actually were. He had been recommended to Nathaniel by 2 people independently and had accepted the retainer by return of post with a note requiring 3 things: the whole of the facts, the whole of them at once, and no instruction as to which of them mattered. He did not attempt to be kind to her, and she was extremely grateful for it. You will forgive me, he said, in the yard at Reading, if I ask you a great many questions to which you would prefer not to know why I am asking. Ask them. Sandmere Court stood at the end of a mile of Chestnut Avenue in the flat green nowhere of West Berkshire, and it had been stripped. She saw it before they had come 100 yards up the drive. The gates stood open because there was nobody to shut them. The park had been let for grazing, and something had been at the young trees. And when they came into the hall, the sound was wrong, and it took her a moment to understand that it was wrong because there were no carpets anywhere, and the whole house had begun to echo like a church. The pictures were gone, frames and all, but the walls behind them had not been repainted since 1811, and so the shape of every picture she had grown up under stood out on the plaster in a slightly brighter yellow, the hunting piece, the 2 indifferent Dutch harbors, the long, blank oblong over the stairs where her mother had been. The steward's room ledgers were on the table where somebody had left them. Sowerby went through them for 2 hours with a candle at his elbow, and at the end of it he set the story out like a man laying cards. The Corn Laws repealed in June 1846. The rent roll on 1,100 arable acres falling. 3 tenancies unrelet by McComas. Then Ireland starving, and the price of maize doing what it did, and 2 cargoes of Indian corn bought forward on credit against the security of the Berkshire land. Then the autumn of 1847, and the crash, and corn at half, and the Liverpool house gone in October with a dozen others, and the bills coming home. And then in 1848, in another hand entirely, a sequence of entries she could not read at all sums received, at intervals, without any source named. Somebody paid his debts, said Sowerby. Somebody, said Nathaniel. I would not put it in a pleading yet, but yes. The proctor closed the ledger. My lord, I am obliged to say a thing that will be disagreeable. Whatever your cousin bought in 48, he bought it from a man who was drowning. That does not make it less true. It makes it cheaper. The Earl of Sandmere was upstairs. He had had the seizure in January. It had taken the whole of his right side and all of his speech and left him one hand. And the woman who came in from the village had been paid up to Lady Day and had gone on coming afterward anyway, which Rosamond thought about for a long time. He was 61 and looked 80. He knew her at once. The eye moved, and the whole ruined face gathered, and something came up out of it that she could not name and did not want to. She sat down beside the bed. I am not going to ask whether you loved me, she said. I do not want the answer, and you cannot give it. I am going to ask you one thing. The hand moved on the coverlet. In September of 49, you gave Nathaniel a certificate of my death, she said. You bought it. I want to know why, not why you lied in 46. I know why you lied in 46. You had a second daughter to sell and a story to keep tidy. I want to know what changed in 49 that made a lie insufficient. What did you need me dead for? Nothing. The eyes stayed on her. Papa, she said. And it came out of her, before she had authorized it, in a voice about 9 years old. And she despised herself instantly and thoroughly for the whole of the 2 seconds it took her to get her face back. The woman from the village brought the slate. It was a child's slate framed in wood, with a stump of chalk on a string, and they had used it since February for yes and no, and the names of the 2 or 3 things he still wanted. He got the chalk into his hand. It took a long time. He wrote 4 letters. They were very large and very bad, and the last ran off the edge and had to be finished on the wood of the frame, and when he had done it, he let go of the chalk and turned his head away from her and would not turn it back. Gret Nathaniel looked at it over her shoulder. Is it a name? He said. Gretchen, is there a Gretchen? Or a place? Rosamond had stood up. She got as far as the landing before her legs stopped being reliable, and she sat down on the top step of her father's staircase in the dark, under the bright yellow oblong where her mother had hung for 30 years, and put both hands over her mouth, because she knew what it was. She had put it away when she was 20, so completely and for so long that it had stopped being an event in her life and had become a kind of story, a foolish thing that had nearly happened and then had not. The sort one might tell an intimate friend late at night and laugh about if one had ever had an intimate friend again. He died at 20 minutes past 4 the following morning. They buried him on the Thursday, and 9 people came, 4 of whom were owed money. Cordelia did not come. There was a letter, which the curate read to nobody in particular, saying that she was not well enough to travel, and Rosamond put it in her pocket unopened and did not take it out again for some weeks. That evening, the 3 of them sat in the steward's room at Sandmere Court, because it was the only room in the house with chairs, and Rosamond told them about Gretna Green. She told it badly at first, in the wrong order, starting with the horses. Then she stopped and started again. It was November of 1844. She had been 20, Nathaniel had been 25. They had known each other 8 months and had been forbidden each other for 6 of them, because Gideon Carew had by then opened a negotiation with a man of 40 who owned a great deal of Kent and had discovered that an unsold daughter is a better asset than a sold one for exactly as long as 2 parties are bidding. That autumn he had begun to be specific about the Kent man. He told me on the 11th, she said, that the thing was as good as settled, and that I should be grateful, and that if I made a scene about it, there was a house in Yorkshire belonging to his sister where I might reflect. They went north on the 12th. Jory Tregarthen drove them, because he was the only man in the stables who could be got out of bed without waking the house, and because he was 24 and thought it the most romantic thing that had ever happened in Berkshire. And Cordelia came because Cordelia was 16 and had found out and had made it perfectly clear that she was either coming with them or telling. They crossed at Sark and came into Springfield on the evening of the 14th, a mile inside Scotland, in the rain. You have not told them the rest, said Nathaniel. I am coming to the rest. Tell it properly, or I will. We stopped at the inn, she said. It was kept by a man named Murgatroyd. I remember him because he was enormous and because he had a wooden leg and made a great deal of use of it as a subject. We came into the front room, and Nathaniel spoke to him, and Murgatroyd said, in front of us both, that we might be married in his parlor in 10 minutes, or married on the road in 5, and that it made no difference at all, and he seemed to think this was very funny. She had not said any of it aloud in 7 years, and found that it came back complete, wet wool drying, a fire too big for the grate, mud on her hem to the knee. So we stood in front of the fire, she said. Murgatroyd was there, and Jory was there. Cordelia had a candle because they had not lit the second lamp. And Nathaniel took my hand and said that he took me for his wife, and I said that I took him for my husband, and Murgatroyd wrote something in a book and asked for 5 shillings. And then, said Sowerby, and then in the morning we turned round and came home. She saw Sowerby's face and answered before he asked. Because I was 20, and I woke up sensible, she said. Because my sister was 16, and I had brought her over a border in the night, and if it were known she would never be received anywhere. Because my father would have said, quite correctly, that I had proved everything he ever said about me. And because there had been no clergyman, and no banns, and no register, and we had paid 5 shillings to a publican with a wooden leg. Everyone knows what a Gretna marriage is. It is a joke in a song. It is not a joke in a song, said Everard Sowerby. She stopped. Say the words to me again, said the proctor. The exact words. As near as you can. I take you for my husband, she said. That is what I said. He said the corresponding thing. Present tense. Yes. Before 2 persons who both heard it. Yes. 3 with my sister and in Scotland. Yes. Everard Sowerby put both his hands flat on the table and looked at them for a while. Then what did you do afterward, he said. Between 44 and 46. I am not asking out of impertinence. I am asking because it will be asked. Rosamond did not look at Nathaniel. We told ourselves it did not count, she said. We agreed we would do it properly in London as soon as it could be managed. And my father heard about the Kent man's mortgages that winter, and let it be understood he was no longer opposed. And then he spent 2 years not fixing a date, because he was negotiating a settlement, and every month he waited, the figure went up. She made herself say the rest of it, and in the meantime, we behaved as though the 14th of November had counted. Both of us. For 22 months, she lifted her chin. That is the answer to the question you are going to be asked, Mr. Sowerby, so you may as well have it in my own voice. We said it did not count, and neither of us believed it. Sowerby was quiet for so long that the candle wanted trimming. My lady, he said at last, I am going to tell you the law, and I would ask you to sit down for it, because in my experience people take it standing and then have to be caught. I am sitting. You are good. He turned his glass a quarter turn on the table. Lord Hardwicke's Act of 1753 requires, in England and in Wales, bans or license, a church, a clergyman, a register. It has stood for 98 years, and it is the reason there is no such thing as a valid clandestine marriage in this country. Yes, it does not extend to Scotland. Rosamond became aware of her own pulse. In Scotland, said Sowerby, the law of marriage is the old law. Consent makes marriage. 2 persons of age who declare, in words of the present tense, that they take one another as husband and wife, are husband and wife from that moment. There is no requirement of a priest. There is no requirement of a building. There is no requirement of a register. Scotland has no civil registration of marriage at all, and will not have one for some years yet, and that is precisely why the thing survives. It is called an irregular marriage by declaration de praesenti, and it is a marriage. It was 5 shillings and a wooden leg, she said. It was 2 competent persons declaring present consent before witnesses within the jurisdiction of Scots law, said Sowerby, which is the whole of what the law requires, and the 5 shillings and the leg are decoration. And a marriage validly contracted in Scotland is recognized in England, and has been recognized in England without serious question for 100 years. The room was completely silent. You are telling me, said Nathaniel, that we are married. I am telling you that you have been married since the 14th of November, 1844, said Everard Sowerby. and that neither of you has done anything since which could possibly have undone it, and that the children born in June 1847 were born in wedlock and are legitimate, and that this lady has been Duchess of Renmore for 6 years and 8 months without being informed of it. Rosamond heard the words arrive one after another and could not attach them to herself. What she thought of, absurdly, was the schoolroom register with the blot in it, and the fact that she had not gone back and written Trewin properly. "Then it is finished," said Nathaniel. He had stood up. "Aubrey has nothing. There is no succession to contest. We prove it and we go home, my lord. We prove it and we go home." "My lord, sit down," said Sowerby, "because I have not finished, and the second half is worse than the first." Something in the tone of it turned Rosamond's head. "Your Grace." The proctor addressed her directly, and used the title for the first time, and did it deliberately, and she understood that he was doing it deliberately. "You must hear this from me now, rather than from counsel in 3 months. By the law of England, the father of a legitimate child has the custody of that child, and the right to determine its education, its religion, its residence, and its whole employment, and that right is absolute. The mother has no right in the matter at all. She is not a guardian. She has no standing to sue." The fire moved in the grate. "There is one act," he went on, "obtained by Mr. Talfourd in 1839, largely through the exertions of a lady who had lost her own children and was not permitted to see them. It allows a mother to petition Chancery for access or for custody of a child under the age of 7. It is a petition. It is not a right. The court may refuse it, and generally does refuse it, where the mother's conduct has been the subject of comment, and it ceases entirely at 7 years. Rosamond heard herself, from somewhere outside, do the arithmetic aloud. "They are 4, she said, "in June. 3 years. "Rather less than 3 years," said Sowerby. She put her hand flat on the table and looked at it, and did not seem able to look anywhere else. "So let me be certain that I have understood you," she said, and her voice was perfectly level. "As I am at present, I am nobody. My sons are nobody. They have no name, no father-in-law, no claim on anything, and they may be called whatever the boys in the lane care to call them. But they are mine, entirely, and nobody in England can take them from me, because in law they do not exist as anything else. That is so. And if you prove this marriage," said Rosamond, "they become the sons of a duke. They do, and I lose them." Everard Sowerby did not soften it, and she never afterward forgot that he had not. "You lose every right you have in them," he said, "at the moment the decree is pronounced. What you have after that, you have because His Grace chooses that you should have it. And there is no instrument known to me by which he can bind himself otherwise." Nathaniel began that same night, in the steward's room at Sandmere Court, with a sheet of the dead Earl's paper and a bad pen. "A deed," he said, "executed by me, before witnesses, transferring the entire care and custody of both boys to their mother, absolutely and irrevocably, and reciting that I hold no right to interfere. Draw it as strongly as the language will go. I will sign it before the suit is filed, and it can be produced in any court in England." "It would be waste paper," said Sowerby. "Draw it." "My lord, I will draw it if you instruct me, and it will still be waste paper, and I would be a poor advocate if I let you sign under a misapprehension about what it does." The proctor did not raise his voice. He was, Rosamond thought, entirely unimpressed by rank in the way a wall is unimpressed. A father cannot contract away the custody of his legitimate child, not by deed, not by covenant, not for consideration. The courts have set such agreements aside repeatedly and on principle, and the principle is that the right is not his to give. Any deed you sign tonight may be torn up by you personally in 10 years, And if you sued to have it set aside, you would very likely win. Then a trust. Money. Money is different. Money you may settle absolutely, and I shall settle it absolutely if you wish. Sowerby folded his hands. You may make this lady rich beyond any dependence on you. You cannot make her a mother-in-law. No amount of the first ever became the second. Rosamond had not spoken for some time. Nathaniel, she said. He turned. Sit down and answer a question, and answer it as it is, not as you would like it to be. She waited until he sat. Suppose we do this. Suppose it is proved, and they are yours-in-law, and I am nothing. And suppose we live very happily for 3 years, and then in the 4th year we quarrel. Not about the boys, about something stupid, money, or your mother, or where we spend the winter. And suppose in the middle of it you say a thing you do not mean, and I take them and go back to Cornwall. I would not, you would not. Very well. Suppose you did. She held his eyes. Who stops you? He was Sansarit. Nobody, said Nathaniel. Nobody. Nobody at all, he said. I could send 2 men down on the Tuesday and have them at Renmore by the Friday, and the law would assist me. And if you went to a magistrate, the magistrate would tell you to go home. He put the pen down. That is exactly the position, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because you would find it out inside a month, and then you would never believe anything else I said. I cannot fix it. It is not within my power to fix. The whole of what I can do is ask you to trust me, and I know precisely what that is worth from a man who has already lost you once through his own vanity, and I know that it is an unfair thing to ask. The fire had got low. Nobody made it up. How long, she said, would the suit take? Contested? Said Sowerby. 2 years. 3 if he appeals to the delegates, and he will appeal. And in those 3 years, the boys are 7. In those 3 years, the boys are 7. The proctor agreed. And at 7, the Act of 1839 no longer avails you, and there is nothing behind it. Sowerby's man came back from Dumfriesshire on the 2nd of August. He had gone up by the mail with 3 questions and £20, and he had been 10 days about it, and what he brought back fitted onto one side of a sheet of paper. The inn at Springfield still stood, though it had been a private house since 1847. Murgatroyd had died in the winter of 1846. And his widow Elspeth, aged 81, was alive and in the parish, and no longer living in the old building. She was living in a new one. It had been built in 1849 at the top of the village, and it had 4 rooms and a slate roof and a range, which was more than anything else in Springfield had. And the conveyance was on the register at Dumfries. The purchase money had been remitted from a house in Carlisle on the instruction of a London agent, and the book was gone. Not the whole book. Murgatroyd's marriage book, every publican on that road kept one. A shilling ledger with the names and the date and the witnesses. Worth nothing to anybody except as a memory of an evening had survived him and had passed with the furniture, and it existed. And Sowerby's man had held it in his hands. The leaves covering the 2nd week of November, 1844, had been cut out, not torn, cut close to the stitching with a blade by somebody unhurried. The widow had been asked about it and had said she knew nothing of any book. 2 other people in Springfield had been asked, and one of them, a man who had been a boy of 14 in 1844, and had held the horses that night, remembered a gentleman coming from London in the autumn of 1848, and spending 3 days in the village asking after old marriages and paying for beer. He remembered the name because it had struck him as an odd one. Tench. Sowerby, who had been in his profession for 31 years and had a face like a ledger, permitted himself one observation. Mr. Silas Tench, he said, attends at Doctors' Commons perhaps 4 times a year. to take copies of wills for clients who prefer not to be seen taking them. He has acted for your cousin since 1846. I have seen him in the passage outside the registry with his hat on." Rosamond was looking at the paper. 1848, she said. Yes. He knew in 48. He knew enough in 48 to send a man 400 miles to cut 2 leaves out of a publican's ledger, said Sowerby, which is a thing no man does on a rumor. Nathaniel had gone to the window. He stood there with his back to the room for some time. "Say the order of it," he said, aloud. "I want to hear whether it stands up when it is said." "In 1845, said Sowerby. "A Scottish solicitor writes to Lord Sandmere. We do not have the letter, but Lady Cordelia found something in that desk in 46 that frightened her, and she got as far as the word Scotland before she stopped. And I do not believe in that coincidence. Say the letter told him what the 14th of November meant. He suppresses it. Naturally, he suppresses it. A married daughter has no marriage portion to negotiate, and he had been dining out on that negotiation for 2 years. Then September 46, said Rosamond. Then September 46, and the parlor, and you gone, which suits him until it does not." Sowerby turned a page. "In 1847, he is ruined. Corn. Now, he is a man with an enormous debt and one asset, which is a piece of information about the Duke of Renmore's marriage, and there is precisely one person in England to whom that information is worth money." "The heir presumptive," said Nathaniel to the window. "In 1848, the debts are paid by a hand that leaves no name in the ledger, and in the autumn of that year Mr. Tench goes to Dumfriesshire. And in 1849, in 1849, said Rosamond. "Somebody notices the flaw." Both men looked at her. "He had bought the evidence," she said. "He had not bought me. And as long as I was somewhere in England alive, I might walk into a room at any moment and say a sentence. So I had to stop being able to walk into rooms." She found that her hands were quite steady. The cholera was extremely convenient. 50,000 dead, and the registers 3 months behind, and half the burials in the river parishes going in without names. If ever there were 12 months in the century in which a woman could be certified dead in Deptford without anybody troubling to look at the body, it was that year. And a physician's fee is not a great sum of money to a man who has just paid an earl's debts. "And your father signed the identification," said Sowerby. "Or somebody did." "Somebody did," she said. Nathaniel turned round from the window. "Say the last part," he said. "My lord." "You have given me a man of business," said Nathaniel. "A cousin who counts, who sees an inconvenience and removes it at the least expense. It is a perfectly good account, and it is missing something, and the thing it is missing is that he came to Cornwall himself. He did not send Tench to Cornwall. A man who is only counting sends Tench." Rosamond understood then, and was surprised at how little she felt about it. "He asked me to marry him," she said, "in April of 43, in my father's drawing room at the end of the season, and my father had told him he might." "And you refused him?" "I refused him in 4 words, she said, "and I was 20, and I thought I was being witty. I could tell you the 4 words. I have thought about them perhaps twice since. He has thought about them rather more often than that." There was a long silence in the steward's room. "Then the last 5 years were not an accident," said Nathaniel. "They were built. The newspapers had it by the 2nd week of August, which meant Stanmer had given it to them. It began small and in the wrong place. 3 lines in a Salisbury paper about a mineral property in Cornwall being inspected by a nobleman whose name was not given, aimed at nobody except the 400 people who would recognize it. Then a London weekly of the kind that lives in the space between what may be printed and what may be understood. Then everywhere, They did not have her name at first. They had, in the language of the trade, a lady of title who had left a great house in the West on the eve of her marriage in the year of the repeal, and whose whereabouts were now the subject of inquiry. And it took the London papers 9 days to turn that into Lady Rosamond Carew, and a further 4 to turn it into the missing woman of Cornwall, which was the form it kept. "He is forcing you to file," said Sowerby. "I am aware of it. Then be aware also that he is right to. If you wait, he sits and says nothing, and the story does his work for a year, and by the time you come into court, every registrar in the building has read a dozen articles about a schoolmistress with 2 children and no husband. File now, and the pleading is the first document in the world, with the facts in it in order." Nathaniel filed on the 19th of August. The suit was in the Court of Arches, which sat at Doctors' Commons on Knightrider Street below St. Paul's, and Rosamond saw the building for the first time on the morning the citation went out, a quiet quadrangle behind an arch, with the registry on one side and the Advocates' Commons on the other, and men in red robes and gray wigs going across the court with bundles under their arms, as though nothing had happened in England since 1620. The suit was brought by Nathaniel Ellsworth, praying the court to pronounce for the validity of a marriage contracted at Springfield in the county of Dumfries on the 14th day of November 1844, and to declare the issue thereof legitimate. Lord Stanmer intervened on the 26th. He had the standing to do it, which Rosamond had not appreciated until Sowerby set it out. He was heir presumptive to the title and to the settled estate, and a decree declaring 2 boys legitimate would strip him of both, and a court would not shut out a man with that much at stake. His intervention was accompanied by an affidavit. Elspeth Murgatroyd, widow, of the parish of Gretna, aged 81 years, made oath and said that she had been married to the late Ezra Murgatroyd for 39 years, that she had lived at the inn at Springfield throughout, that she had a clear recollection of the season in question, that no such ceremony, declaration or exchange of words as was alleged had taken place under her roof at any time in November 1844 or in any other month, that she had never seen the lady named, and that no book of marriages had ever been kept upon the premises to her knowledge. Sworn at Dumfries, marked with her mark, she being unable to write. Rosamond read it in Sowerby's chambers, with the window open on the noise of Knightrider Street. "She is 81, she said. "She is. She has a slate roof." "She has," said Everard Sowerby, "and it will not be put to her that she has one, because we cannot prove who paid for it, and if we try and fail, we shall look like people who bully old women. That is where we are, your grace. We have your word and his word, which the court will discount because you are the parties. We have a book with the leaves cut out. We have a sister who has not answered a letter in 3 weeks. And we have one living witness to the declaration itself, who is somewhere between the Burra copper mines and the far side of the world, and who left England in March 1845. Below the window a man was calling something about the exhibition. "Then what have we in fact got?" said Rosamond. "Time," said Sowerby, "and not much of that. They will press for the earliest session. We shall be in that court by the last week of August, and I should not be honest with you if I said I liked our position." She saw the Crystal Palace on the 21st of August from the top of an omnibus in the Kensington Road, and she was not prepared for it. Nobody had described the size. People had described the glass, and the elms inside it, and the fountain, and the 6 million who had come through the turnstiles since May, and none of it conveyed the thing itself, a building 1,800 feet long standing in Hyde Park, like a greenhouse built for a race of larger people, catching the afternoon and throwing it back so that from a quarter of a mile off you could not look at the south front directly. There were 400 people queuing at the entrance, and it was a Thursday. Rosamond sat on the knife board with her hands in her lap and thought, 5 years. 5 years in which she had mended nets and taught 31 children and been afraid every day of a knock at the door, and in the same 5 years, this had gone up out of nothing on a piece of grass she used to ride across, and half the world had come to see it, and every person on this omnibus sincerely, that they were living in the best year that had ever happened. She found that she was not able to be angry about it. It was too big to be angry at. It was simply a joke that had been made at her expense by somebody with no idea she existed. The Dowager Duchess of Renmore received her at 4 o'clock in a house in Hill Street with the blinds half down against the sun. Augusta Ellsworth was 58. She had been a duchess at 22 and a widow at 40, and she had run the Wiltshire estate for 9 years between her husband's death and her son's coming to it, and had run it better than either of them. She did not rise. "Sit down," she said. "You may have the chair with the arms. You look as though you have been traveling. I am going to be extremely disagreeable for about 10 minutes, and then we shall have tea, and I should like you to understand that the disagreeable part is not a preliminary to anything. I mean all of it." "Very well. You left my son's house at midnight without speaking to him." "Yes. You had seen a thing which, I am given to understand, was capable of an innocent construction and did not carry one on the face of it. Nobody disputes that you were entitled to be destroyed by it. What I dispute is the next part." The old woman's hands were perfectly still on the arms of her chair. "You had a tongue in your head. You might have stood in that doorway and said one sentence, any sentence, the worst you could think of, and made them look at you, and whatever happened afterward would have happened in daylight. You chose silence because silence is dignified, and speaking would have been humiliating, and you have paid for it with 5 years, and so has he, and so, I observe, have 2 children I have never seen." Rosamond sat and took it. "Have you finished?" "Nearly. You will find, if you look, that I am not defending my son. He waited 3 days out of vanity and then believed a liar because it was comfortable, and I have told him so." Augusta's mouth moved. "I am saying that you are very alike, and that between you have made a 5-year catastrophe out of an evening." "Then we understand each other," said Rosamond. "I think we may. Now tell me the rest." "Nathaniel writes letters like a man drafting a lease." So she told her. She told it flatly and in order, and the old woman listened without interrupting. And when Rosamond came to September 1849, and the certificate and the physician's signature, the Dowager Duchess of Renmore set down her cup so carefully that it made no sound against the saucer at all. "Say that part again." "My father gave him a certificate of my death, registered in Deptford, September 49. It was bought. He came to me at Christmas of that year," Augusta said. "He had been down in the river parishes. He had mud on him to the knee, and he would not say where he had been, and I decided not to inquire, because he was 30 and a duke, and I have never been able to ask that child a direct question." She was quiet for a moment. "He was counting graves," she said. "That is what that was." "Yes. He went down there 3 winters, and I let him go alone." She got up and went to the window and stood with her back to the room, and when she turned round again her face had been put entirely in order. "Very well," said Augusta Ellsworth. "I shall write 4 letters this evening, and I shall be at Knightrider Street on the first day and every day after it, and I shall sit where the registrars can see me. Aubrey has been dining in my house for 20 years, and he will find that stops. I am not doing this because I have forgiven you, and you are not to imagine that I have." "I did not imagine it." "Good," said the old woman. "Now, which of them draws?" Cordelia came to Hill Street the following morning at 10, sent for by a note that did not ask. She had known Cordelia would be 23. She had done the arithmetic on the coach. It was not sufficient. The girl who had held a candle in a Dumfriesshire parlor at 16 had been thin and quick and had laughed at nothing at all for whole minutes together. What came into the room was a composed young woman in a good gray dress who had learned, somewhere in the intervening years, how to hold her hands. Neither moved to embrace the other. It was not considered and rejected. It simply did not arise. "You are alive," said Cordelia. "Yes, I knew that. I want it said out loud, because I have said it to myself perhaps 1,000 times in the last 7 months, and it has never once sounded true." "Sit down," said Rosamond. She sat, and she told it. And she told it in the order it had happened to her, which Rosamond afterward recognized as the order of a person who had rehearsed nothing. In September 1846, she had been looking in their father's desk for a franc, and had found a letter from a solicitor in Dumfries, dated the previous year. She had not understood the Latin in it. She had understood the English, which said that on the facts communicated, the connection at Springfield was a valid marriage by the law of Scotland, that it could not be dissolved except by decree, and that any subsequent ceremony in England would be a nullity. "I was 18, she said. "I knew Papa had read it, because it was in the drawer with his own things. I knew he had done nothing about it for 14 months. And I knew that you were being married in 5 days, and that he was going to let it happen. Why did you not come to me?" "Because I am a coward," said Cordelia. "And because I had decided that if I told you, you would go to him, and he would say it was nothing, and then he would know who had found it. So I took it to Nathaniel instead, late at night, and I did it badly, and you came up the stairs." She stopped. "I saw you," she said. "I want that said too. I saw you in the doorway, and I did not let go of his coat, and I have never been able to explain that to myself in 7 years. I was frightened of you. I think it is as small as that. I was 18, and I was frightened of my sister's face, and my hands would not do what I told them." Rosamond said nothing at all. "And then you were gone," said Cordelia, "and 3 years later, Papa took me to a room in Deptford. Tell me, there was a coffin, and it was shut," she said, quite steadily. "There was a man there who was not the undertaker. Papa said the parish required an identification from the family, and that it would be worse for you if it were not made, and he put a paper in front of me, and I signed it. I was 21. She looked up. "I never saw a face, Rosamond. Not once. I have had 7 years of nights to be certain of it." "When did you know?" "In January. He had the seizure on the 4th, and I was going through the desk for the tenant agreements, and there was a memorandum of payments for 49 in his own hand, and there was a sum of £200 against the name of a physician, and the date was 3 days before the room in Deptford." "Rimmer, said Cordelia. "I sat in that room until it got dark, and then I wrote 3 words on a piece of paper and sent it to Renmore Abbey without any name to it. Because I did not know anything else, I did not know where you were. I have never known where you were. And because if I had signed it, he would have come to me and asked me questions I could not answer, and I could not bear to be the one who raised him and then failed him." So that was the note. Rosamond found that she had known it since the schoolhouse. In the way one knows things, one has declined to say. "You will make an affidavit," she said. Cordelia looked at her hands. "Cordelia." "He has my letters," her sister said. "What letters?" "The ones I wrote to Aubrey Ellsworth in the autumn of '46, when I was 18 years old, and you had vanished, and I had done it. And he was the only person in England who was kind to me." She lifted her chin, and it was the first thing she had done all morning that Rosamond recognized. "There are 11 of them. They are not improper. They are worse than improper. They are the letters of a stupid, frightened girl saying things about her own father and her own sister that were not true and that she believed at the time, and he kept everyone, and he has told me not lately, in 49. When I signed that paper precisely what a court would make of a witness who had written them. They would be nothing beside, and I signed a false identification, said Cordelia, under my hand. In a matter of a death, Sowerby will have told you the word for that. The clock in Augusta's morning room struck the half hour. I have thought about nothing else since your letter, Cordelia said. I want you to know that. I have got as far as the door of Doctors' Commons twice, and her sister's face did something, and then stopped doing it. I cannot, she said. Rosamond stood up. She had a great many things available to her, and used none of them. And she thought about that afterward, in a cottage in Cornwall, with a fair amount of shame. Then I will not ask you again, she said, and went out. Sowerby laid it out for him on the Monday, in chambers, with the door shut. Nathaniel had asked for it without softening and had got what he asked for, which he was beginning to understand was the whole of what one paid Everard Sowerby for. They had the party's own evidence, which the court would discount. They had a mutilated ledger, which proved that somebody had cut 2 leaves out of a book, but not who. They had one witness to the declaration who was against them on oath, and 81 years old, one who had refused, and one who had been in the Antipodes for 6 years. They had no register, because Scotland kept none. If Tregarthen could be found, said Sowerby, and brought home, and put in that court, we should win in a morning. He was a witness to the words. There is nothing in the case that a jury of one honest man would not decide on his evidence alone. Then find him. He sailed from Falmouth in March 1845 for South Australia and went to the Burra Burra Copper Works. And that is the whole of what his mother's neighbors know. The proctor turned his pen over. A letter to Adelaide is 4 months out. If it finds him at once, and he answers at once, and takes a passage at once, it is a year. It is a year, my lord, in the best case that can be constructed, and this cause will be pronounced upon in about 3 weeks. Nathaniel went to Hill Street that afternoon, and wrote to Stanmer. The letter took 4 drafts, and the version he sent was a dozen lines long. He offered to withdraw the suit, that he would discontinue, that no decree would be sought in his lifetime, that the succession would stand undisturbed, and that, in consideration, his cousin would make no further public statement concerning the lady or the children, and would cause the newspapers to be let alone. The reply came the next morning by hand, and it was 3 lines, and Nathaniel read it standing in the hall. Stanmer declined. He observed that a discontinuance settled nothing, since a suit not prosecuted may be prosecuted afterward by other persons, and at other times, that the children were 4 years old and would be men for 50 years, and that what he required was a decree, pronounced, entered, and irreversible, so that in 1881 no person coming forward with a story about a Scottish inn should be able to trouble the peace of the family. He added that he was sorry it could not be arranged more agreeably. Nathaniel stood in his mother's hall for some time with the paper in his hand. He had spent 3 winters on the north side of a burial ground in Deptford. That was the thing that came to him, and it came whole, the frost on the clay, and the mounds without boards, and the sexton who had stopped asking what he wanted and simply nodded when he came through the gate. 400 in that ground in the autumn of 49, and no boards, because boards cost money and the parish had none. He had walked the rows and counted, and there was no version of the arithmetic that got him to a name, and he had known it perfectly well, and had gone back the following November and counted again. He had believed that he was grieving. He had been proud of it. In the private way, a man is proud of a thing he has not told anybody. He had thought of himself in those winters as a man being faithful to something. He had been standing in a field being lied to, and the man who had arranged the lie had just written to him, in 3 lines and a courteous close, that what he required was a decree. Nathaniel folded the letter and put it in his pocket and went to find his mother, and discovered that his hands were entirely steady, and understood with some surprise that what had happened in the hall was not grief at all. They took her evidence on the 27th of August in a room off the registry with the window shut. She had braced for a courtroom, and what she got was a table and an examiner in a black gown who was perhaps 40 and had a cold, and a clerk who wrote, and the whole gray machinery of a jurisdiction that had decided 300 years ago that truth was best got at on paper. Nobody cross-examined her. Nobody was permitted in the room who might have wanted to. The interrogatories had been settled in advance by the intervener's proctor, and the examiner read them out, one at a time, in a voice entirely without weight, and she answered, and the clerk wrote it down. It took 4 hours and 20 minutes. Where did you go upon leaving Renmore House on the night of the 14th of September, 1846? By what means were you conveyed, and at whose charge? Did you sell any article of jewelry, and to whom, and for what sum? By what name were you known in the county of Cornwall, and why did you assume it? Did you at any time state to any person in that county that you were a widow? She had, in the first winter, twice, to 2 different women, and she had never afterward corrected it, and she said so. Did you at any time between September 1846 and June 1851 describe yourself as Duchess of Renmore or claim any right or title? She had not. She had spent 5 years making sure of it. Set out the name and address of every man with whom you have resided or lodged in the said county. Set out the circumstances of the birth of the children named in the pleadings, and the account given by you to the midwife attending of their father. She had told Keziah Bly that her husband was dead of a fever in Bristol. She said so. She answered every question truthfully. That was the decision she had made in the coach coming up from Cornwall, and she had made it once and had not revisited it, and she kept to it now for 4 hours and 20 minutes, while the clerk's pen went on scratching, and she understood the whole time with complete clarity that every true answer she gave was killing her own cause, because the intervener's case did not require her to be a liar. The intervener's case required her to be a woman who had for 5 years told the world she was single, who had taken a false name, and let it be understood she was a widow, and never once in 60 months claimed the marriage she now asked a court to believe in. And every one of those things was true, and she had done them all deliberately, and she had done them to keep 2 children safe, and none of that was going to be written down, because none of it had been asked. When the examiner had finished, he thanked her and blew his nose and said that the depositions would be published to the court in the ordinary course. She asked what that meant. It meant they would be read out. The cause came on in the Court of Arches on the 2nd of September, and the reading of the depositions occupied the greater part of the morning. She sat with Augusta on her left in black silk and Nathaniel on her right, in a chamber paneled to the ceiling and smelling of old paper, and a clerk of the court stood up with her deposition and read it aloud from the beginning. She had not understood until it began what it would be. He read it in the flat professional monotone of a man reading a schedule of fixtures. Every question, every answer, her voice taken down at dictation speed and turned into the third person and the past tense. The said deponent saith that she did assume the name of Pascoe, with no pause anywhere and no weight on anything, and nothing of her in it at all. 4 hours of her life came back at her in 55 minutes, with everything human filed off. And there was no way to object, because all of it was correct. She sat entirely still and listened to a stranger's crimes being read out in her own words. And then, an hour in, the clerk read the paragraph concerning the birth of the children. And the court reporter for 2 London papers wrote steadily. And the names went into the record. Edwin Pascoe and Ambrose Pascoe, born the 12th of June 1847. Twins, the said deponent being at that time unattended and known by a false name, their status being at present unestablished. Augusta Ellsworth's hand closed on Rosamund's wrist and stayed there. The intervener's proctor rose in the afternoon and said very little because he did not need to. He read the Murgatroyd affidavit. He observed that the marriage book relied upon could not be produced, that the sole surviving witness swore nothing had occurred, and that the lady herself had passed 5 years denying by word and conduct the very status she now asserted, a marriage not being a thing a person may keep in reserve. He sat down after a quarter of an hour. The judge, who had said perhaps 40 words all day, said that he was not satisfied upon the evidence as it stood, that the burden lay upon the promovent, that the court would not pronounce for a marriage of this description upon the testimony of the parties and a mutilated book, and that the cause would stand over to the Michaelmas session for such further evidence as might be produced. He rose. Everybody else rose. In the passage outside, in the noise, Nathaniel stopped and stood with one hand flat against the paneling. He did not say anything at all. Cordelia's seat 3 rows behind had been empty since 10 o'clock. The papers reached Porthgowan on the 6th. Mrs. Bosanquet had them at the inn, because Mrs. Bosanquet had always had them, and by Sunday there was not a household in the village that had not heard the whole of it read out by somebody. The vestry met on Tuesday evening. There were 5 of them, and they met behind the church with a candle and the parish chest. And it took 35 minutes, and Elias Verrall told her afterward exactly how it had gone, because he thought she was owed it. Nobody said an unkind word about her. That was the part she had not anticipated. What they said was that the school took the National Society's grant, and the grant came with an inspection in the spring, and a schoolmistress whose name was in the London papers in connection with a suit about her own marriage was a difficulty they had no means of managing. Verrall said that she had taught in that room for 3 years, and that the boys could cipher and the girls could read, which was not true anywhere else on that coast. Then they voted 4-1. She was informed by letter on the Wednesday, in the churchwarden's careful hand, with the wages made up to Michaelmas. Ned came home on the Thursday with a split lip. He would not say how. He said he fell, with such transparent and offended innocence that she nearly laughed, and then ate an enormous tea and went out again, and was cheerful all evening. And she put ointment on it at bedtime and got nothing out of him. It was Ambrose who told her 3 days later, without being asked. He had not drawn since the Wednesday. She had noticed on the first day and said nothing. On the second, she put the sketchbook and pencils on the table where he would pass them, and he passed them. And on the third evening, she found the book exactly where she had left it, cover down, with a fine gray line of dust along the top edge. He was at the window when he said it. He did not turn round. "There is a boy in the lane," he said, "who says I am a bastard." "Ambrose, I looked it up," he said. "It is in the dictionary Mr. Verrall gave me. It means a child whose parents are not married to each other." He was perfectly level about it, in the way he was level about tides. So I could not tell him he was wrong. That is the part I keep thinking about. Ned hit him, which was quicker, but it did not make it wrong. It only made him stop saying it. Rosamund stood in the middle of her own kitchen. "He asked me who my father is," said Ambrose. and I do not know what I am allowed to say, because I do know. I have known for about 6 weeks, and you have not told me that I know, so I have not said it to anybody, not even Ned, in case it was a thing I was supposed to be pretending about. He turned round then. I would like to be told what I am allowed to say, he said. That is all. I do not mind waiting for the rest. And it was not the court, and it was not the reading of the deposition, and it was not the churchwarden's letter with the wages made up to Michaelmas. It was a 4-year-old boy standing at a window asking permission, and the gray dust along the top edge of a closed book. Rosamond Carew sat down on the floor of her own kitchen with her back against the dresser, and her son came and sat down beside her because that appeared to be what was wanted, and Loveday Tregarthen, who had come in the back way with a loaf and had heard the last of it from the scullery, put the loaf down on the table and went out again without a word and did not mention it for a month. Nathaniel came down from London on the 16th of September and did 3 things that night. He did them at Rosamond's table, with Sowerby's clerk and the curate of the parish as witnesses, in an order he had evidently settled somewhere north of Exeter, because he did not hesitate over any of it. The first was a notice of discontinuance. "You will lose," said Rosamond. "I will withdraw." It is a different word, and it means something different in that building. He had brought the draft down with him, and it was 2 lines long. "If I go to Michaelmas, I will lose, and a decree will be pronounced against the marriage." And that is what he has been playing for since August, because a decree binds everybody forever. If I discontinue, there is no decree, there is nothing pronounced. There is a suit that was begun and dropped, and in 50 years' time, it is a curiosity. And the boys have nothing. The boys have no name and no succession and no claim on anything of mine that is settled, he said. And they have you entire, with nobody in England able to take them out of your hands, because in law they remain what they are now, which is yours and nobody else's. That is the whole of the trade. I have been 3 weeks looking at it from every side, and there is no 4th thing. He signed it. The second was a deed of settlement, drawn in London as tightly as it would go. Everything that was not entailed the funds, the Somerset colliery royalties, the London house, £41,000 and 3%, settled irrevocably upon Rosamond Carew and the children Edwin and Ambrose, with trustees who were not her and not him and not anybody's cousin. It cannot be undone, he said. That is the point of it. If we quarrel in the 4th year, this stands. The 3rd was a declaration in his own hand, which nobody had asked him for, undertaking never during his life to institute or support any proceeding to establish the marriage of the 14th of November 1844. He read it out and signed that too, and the clerk and the curate signed under him and went away. And the 2 of them were alone in the kitchen with the candle and the papers on the table between them. "Say what it costs you," she said, out loud. "I want it said. It costs Aubrey the title in due course, which is nothing to me. It costs me the right to be their father in any way the world recognizes." He was looking at the table. "They will be Pasco. If they are asked at school who their father was, they will say the same thing they say now, which is nothing, and in 13 years one of them will be 17 and will work out precisely what I signed on this table and why. And I do not know what he will make of it, and I am not going to be able to explain it in a way that does not sound like a man who preferred the arrangement in which he could not be refused. And if I had asked you not to sign it, you did not ask me to sign it," said Nathaniel, "and you have not thanked me for it. And I would think a great deal less of you if you had, because it was mine to sign and not yours, and I would be obliged if we did not turn it into a thing you owe me. It is the second worst outcome. I have chosen it over the worst one. That is the whole of what has happened at this table. The sea moved beyond the window, doing its endless faithful work in the dark. Rosamond got up. She did not do it quickly. She had never done anything quickly in her life, when it mattered not, when it was real. And she crossed her own kitchen at the pace of a woman who has thought clearly about a thing and is now choosing it with the whole of herself. She stopped in front of him. "I want you to understand something," she said, "and I want it understood tonight. Because tonight is the only night in the next 50 years when it cannot be mistaken for anything else." He looked up. "You have nothing," she said. "There is no title in it for me now, and no name for them, and no vindication. And no court is ever going to say that I was telling the truth. Aubrey Ellsworth has won, and he will go on winning, and one day he will be Duke of Renmore, and there is not a thing to be done about it. There is nothing left in this for me to want except you." She put her hand flat on the table beside his. "And because you sat on a kitchen floor for 4 hours and let a boy tell you about seagulls," she said, "and because you carried stone for Jago Nankoro for 9 hours and did not once say who you were, and because when I asked you who would stop you, you said nobody, and I have thought about that answer every day since, and it is the only answer any man has ever given me that I have been able to build on." "Rosamond, I tried," she said. "I was extremely determined about it. 5 years. I never stopped." Nathaniel Ellsworth reached up and took her face in both hands, the way a man holds a thing he is afraid of losing a second time, not tightly, not to keep it, but with a care so complete that it had a kind of gravity of its own. "I will not waste this," he said. "It was not a declaration. It was a vow, private and entire, made in a kitchen to one person with nobody to hear it." "No," she said, "you won't." And afterward, much later, when the candle had burned down and the tide had turned below the window, the small hard fact was still sitting in the middle of the table with the papers, and neither of them pretended otherwise. They could not marry. If the 14th of November 1844 had meant what Sowerby said it meant, then any ceremony now was bigamy and a felony. If it had not, then there was nothing to prevent them, but no court would ever say so, because the suit that might have said so had been withdrawn that evening in this room by the only man who could bring it. They had chosen each other, and there was no instrument in England that would put a stamp on it. She told Loveday Tregarthen everything on the last Sunday in September, in the kitchen with the bread oven, because it had become intolerable not to. It was not a decision either. She came up the lane to fetch the boys, and found the old woman shelling peas at the table with the door open on the evening, and she sat down opposite her and heard herself say, without any preliminary at all, "My name is not Ruth Pascoe." "No," said Mrs. Tregarthen. "I shouldn't think it is. You knew. I knew you came in October of '46 in boots that didn't fit you, and hands that had never done a day, and mended nets for 2 years without complaining once, which is more than I can say for my own sister." She went on shelling. "I never wanted the rest of it. What would I do with it?" So Rosamond told her the rest of it. She told it from the parlor to the vestry room, and it took an hour and a half, and the old woman put the peas aside, somewhere in the middle, and did not touch them again. She told her about Springfield, and the 5 shillings and the cut leaves. She told her about the certificate bought in Deptford. She told her about a court in London where a clerk had read her own answers back to her in a voice with nothing in it. And at the end, she told her the part she had never told anybody, which was why she had come to Porthgowan in the first place. "Your son," she said. Loveday Tregarthen's hands stopped. "January of '45. My father turned him off without a character," said Rosamond, "and it was because of me. Because he had driven us north in November, and my father found out, and he could not do anything to me, so he did it to Jory. And Jory stood in the yard with his box, and he told me where he came from, and he said if ever I had need of it. He never said a word of it in any letter. He would not have. No, the old woman agreed after a moment. No, he wouldn't. That is why I came here. That is the whole reason. There was one place in England I knew of that had nothing to do with my father, and it was because a groom of 24 was kind to me in a stable yard for half a minute, and I have lived at the bottom of your lane for 5 years, and let you mind my children twice a week, and never told you. Loveday Tregarthen sat for a long time. Then she got up. She went to the dresser and reached along the top of it, above the plates, where a tin tea caddy stood between a china dog and a jar of buttons, and she brought it down and set it on the table and took the lid off. It was full of paper. He wrote every year, she said. Falmouth first before he went, then Adelaide, then the borough. Rosamond looked into the tin and did not understand for a moment what she was being shown. Mrs. Tregarthen, I can't read them, the old woman said. She said it without embarrassment, the way a person states the weather. I never could. There was no school here till Verrall's father, and I was out at the Pilchards at 9. She lifted the papers out and put them on the table in a stack that made a soft sound. Old Mr. Pierce read them to me. The Methody. He'd come up Sunday evenings when there was one and read it out twice, and then again the week after, if I asked, and he never once made me feel small over it. He's at Redruth now with his daughter, and he's 71 and sharp as a tack, and he'd remember every one of them, because that man never forgot a thing in his life. She put her hand flat on the stack. They're all here, she said. 45 to 49. There's been none since 49, and I've stopped expecting. Rosamond's hands were not entirely steady. May I? Maid, said Loveday Tregarthen. They've been sat up there 6 year. Somebody may as well. They were in order because she had put each one back on top of the last. The earliest was dated the 9th of March 1845 at Falmouth, written the day before a ship called the Emily Kerr sailed for Port Adelaide, and it ran to 3 sides in a clear countryman's hand, with the spelling of a man who had learned late and worked at it. It began with the passage money and the state of his chest, and went on to a man from Camborne he had fallen in with, and the wages said to be paying at the borough, and his mother's rent, which he had left with the Bosankos for 2 quarters. And then, halfway down the second side, with no more ceremony than he had given the rent. Mother, you will hear from folk at home that I was turned off without a character, and that it was over a matter of horses. It was not over any matter of horses. I drove Lady R. and His Grace the young Duke into Scotland in the November, and stood witness for them at an inn at Springfield over the border, the 2 of them holding hands before the fire and saying they took one another for man and wife. And the landlord wrote it in his book, and I put my name to it after his, and the young sister held the candle for us because they had not lit the second lamp. I would do it again. His lordship found it out in the January, and I was gone within the week. I tell you because you will hear the other, and I will not have you believe it. Rosamond read it 4 times. Then she put it down on the table and pressed both hands flat over her mouth, and Loveday Tregarthen went on sitting opposite her and did not say anything at all. And outside somewhere on the hill, Ned was shouting at his brother about something that did not matter in the least. 6 years. It had been 6 years and 7 months on the top of a dresser between a china dog and a jar of buttons, in a kitchen 20 steps from her own door, in the house of a woman who had minded her children twice a week and had never once asked her a question. Silas Tench had gone 400 miles and cut 2 leaves out of a ledger with a blade. Aubrey Ellsworth had bought a widow, a slate roof, and a physician's signature, and an earl's debts, and 5 years of a woman's life. And neither of them had been able to buy this, because neither of them had known it existed, and neither of them had known it existed because the only person who had it could not read it, and the only person who could have told them what it said was a Methodist preacher of 71 who had never in his life mentioned another man's letter to anybody. Sowerby came down by the night mail and was in Porthgowan by 4 the following afternoon, which for a man of 58 who disliked the sea air was an unusual demonstration. He read the letter standing up in Rosamund's kitchen, with his hat still in his other hand. Then he sat down and read it again, and put it on the table and squared it with the edge, and said something in Latin under his breath, which Rosamund did not catch and did not ask about. "Is it enough? Tell me the whole custody of it," said Sowerby. "Every hand it has passed through. Do not tidy it. Written at Falmouth, the 9th of March, 1845. Carried or posted to this house, she does not know which. She thinks a man off the boat brought it. Read aloud to her by the Reverend Headley Pierce, Wesleyan, within a week of its arrival. Put in that tin, taken out perhaps a dozen times since when she wanted it read again. Never out of this house. And the mother cannot read. The mother cannot read a word." Everard Sowerby put his fingertips together. "Then it is the best piece of evidence I have handled in 31 years, he said. "And not because it is truthful. Truthful documents are 2 a penny. It is because it was made in March 1845 for a purpose that had nothing whatever to do with this cause, by a man who could not conceivably have foreseen it, and it has sat since in the custody of a person physically incapable of altering it, curating it, or knowing what it said. Tench might have found Jory. He looked for the book. He found the book and dealt with it, and a man who has dealt with the book stops looking because he believes he has the only record there is." The proctor's mouth moved fractionally. "It did not occur to him that a groom might write home. It would not have occurred to me either. It is the most ordinary act in the case, and the only one nobody thought to buy." Then we go back to the court, and Sowerby's face did the thing she had learned, over 6 weeks, to dread. "That," he said, "is where the difficulty is, and I want you to understand it fully before His Grace comes back from the quay, because he will want to be told he can undo Thursday, and he cannot." He discontinued. There was no decree. There was no decree. And had he simply lost, I could bring it on again in 12 months with this letter, and we should very likely succeed. Sowerby turned to the paper a quarter turn on the table, but he did not lose. He went into that registry of his own free will, as promovent, with competent advice, and put an end to his own suit, and he executed a declaration under his hand, undertaking never to institute or support such a proceeding during his life. He drew that himself. I begged him not to. The kitchen was very quiet. "So he is barred by his own act," said Rosamund. "He is barred by his own act, and if he applies to be let out of it, the court's first question will be what has changed since the 16th of September, and the answer is a letter that was in existence 6 years before the suit began, and could have been found by ordinary diligence. Sowerby did not soften it. A man may not withdraw a suit, take the benefit of the withdrawal, and then come back 3 weeks later saying he has thought of something. Courts detest it. There is one way in, and it is a narrow one." "Say it, fraud," said Everard Sowerby. "Not our fraud, theirs. If it can be shown that the withdrawal was procured, that the position His Grace was faced with in September was manufactured by the intervener, that the leaves were cut out at his direction, that a witness was bought, that a death was purchased in 1849 to make the whole cause impossible, then the court is not enlarging an indulgence. It is refusing to be used as an instrument. That is a thing courts will do. Then we prove the fraud." "We prove the fraud first," said Sowerby, "and the marriage second, and in that order, because the second is not open to us at all until the first is made out, which means the letter is not our case, Your Grace. The letter is what we win with afterward. Our case is Tench and Rimmer and a slate roof at Springfield, and a bundle of letters in your sister's hand that a man has been keeping in a box since 1846 in order to make certain she never opened her mouth. Rosamond looked at the tea caddy on the table. "How long?" she said. "Michaelmas sits from the second week of October," he said. "If we are not before that judge, by the end of the month we are before him in January. And by January he will have had the whole autumn to consolidate everything he has bought. And we cannot send to Australia and wait, because Tregarthen is not at the borough. You do not know that. I know that the borough cannot keep a shift together," said Sowerby, "because gold was found at Ballarat in Victoria in the same month, and the newspapers say the copper works cannot keep a shift together. Every Cornishman on that continent is walking east. If I write to Adelaide tomorrow, it is 4 months out and 4 months home, and there will be nobody at the other end to receive it." He put his hand flat on the letter. "We do not need him alive," he said. "That is the mercy in it. We need his hand, and an unbroken chain of custody, and one old preacher at Redruth who can swear he read these words aloud in this kitchen in the spring of 1845. Cordelia came on the 29th, unannounced, on the outside of the Truro coach. She arrived at 6:30 with one bag, having walked the last 2 miles because the carrier had gone, and she stood in the lane below the cottage in the dark with her boots ruined, and Rosamond opened the door to a knock and did not for a moment know her. "I have read the papers," said Cordelia, "all of them, since August. Come in. No, let me say it in the lane, because if I come in first I shall not say it." She had her hands closed on the handle of the bag. "I know exactly what he has. I have known for a fortnight that I would have to do this, and I have spent all of them working out what it costs, and I want you to hear that I have counted it, because otherwise you will think I came down here in a rush of feeling and will change my mind at Reading, then count it out loud." "He publishes the letters," said Cordelia, "within a week. They are the letters of an 18-year-old girl saying that her sister was always wild, and that her father was long-suffering, and that she herself had done nothing wrong, and she believed every word when she wrote them, and none of it was true. They will be in 3 papers. Everyone I have dined with in 4 years will read them. And I signed a false identification of a body in 1849 under my own hand. And Mr. Sowerby will have told you what that is. And I shall have to swear to that in open court before I swear to anything else, because if I do not say it first, they will say it for me. Yes. So I shall not be received anywhere, and there will be no marriage. And Aunt Selina's house at Florence will be the whole of my remaining life. And I have written to her." Her chin came up. "I have thought about all of it, and I have thought about it soberly, and it does not signify." "Why does it not signify?" "Because I stood in that room and held the candle," said Cordelia. "That is why. There were 5 people in England who saw it and heard the words. Murgatroyd is dead. Jory Tregarthen is on the other side of the world. You are a party, and he is a party, and neither of you will be believed on your own oath about your own marriage." She was crying now, and appeared not to have noticed. "I am the only person alive in this country who saw it and has nothing to gain, and I have known that since the 2nd of September, and I sat in Hill Street on the 2nd of September and did not go." Rosamond stood in her own doorway. She was aware of the several things available to her, and that 7 years was a long time, and that a good deal of what her sister had described had been earned. "Come in," she said. "You have walked from the turnpike." That was all. It was not forgiveness, and neither of them mistook it for forgiveness, and they both understood, standing there, that the real thing was going to take a number of years and might not arrive at all. Cordelia came in. She sat down at the table with her ruined boots and her bag still in her hand, and she was trying to say something else and not managing it. And at that moment, Ned counted the stairs in his nightshirt to find out who was in the kitchen. He looked at her for about 2 seconds. Then he climbed into her lap, arranged himself, and told her with total confidence, as a matter of immediate and pressing importance to a stranger at 6:30 in the evening, about a seagull called the Governor, who lived on the 3rd bollard and had beaten off 2 others that afternoon by superior tactics. And that was the thing that undid Lady Cordelia Carew, who had counted the cost in the lane and had not moved a muscle. Nathaniel found his cousin in the Crystal Palace on the 13th of October, 2 days before it closed. It was not chance. Stanmer had been at the exhibition a dozen times that season and had a subscriber's ticket and a habit, the western end of the nave on a Monday. And Silas Tench had not been the only man in London capable of paying a doorkeeper. The building was very full, and the noise under the glass was enormous and strange. Not a roar, but a continuous hum, 30,000 pairs of feet, and the fountain going, and somewhere a long way off an organ. Nathaniel came down the nave, past the elms, and turned into the mineral courts. The Cornish exhibits were at the far end, a Harvey pumping engine in section with the cylinder cut away so that people could see into it, ranks of copper ore in glass cases labeled by mine and by parish. And beyond them, the serpentine green and dark red, and shot through with veins like something living, sawn, and turned and polished into pillars and a table and a heap of small pieces that the man in charge of the stand was giving to children. Stanmer was standing at the pumping engine with his hands behind his back. Aubrey, cousin, he did not appear even slightly surprised. You have come up. I did wonder. I have, then let me save you some time. If it is the letters, I meant what I said to the girl in 49, and I shall do it within the week, and I shall be sorry about it, which I know you will not believe. He turned round. And if it is an appeal to sentiment, we are both too old. It is neither, said Nathaniel. I have brought you an account. He took out a folded paper and did not open it because he did not need to open it. On the 11th of October 1849, he said, a conveyance was registered at Dumfries of a plot of ground at the head of the village of Springfield, together with a dwelling of 4 rooms erected thereon, to Elspeth Murgatroyd, widow. The consideration was £190. It was remitted from Fenwick and Bell of Carlisle, on the instruction of a London agent, and Fenwick and Bell keep their books like everybody else, and the register at Dumfries is open to any man who pays a shilling. Stanmer's face did not move. In the autumn of 1848, said Nathaniel, a gentleman from London spent 3 days in that village asking after old marriages and paying for beer, and gave his name freely because there was no reason at that date to conceal it. And the name was Tench. He has been in your employment since 46. He was in the passage at Doctors' Commons on the 2nd of September, and Mr. Sowerby saw him there with his hat on. 2 women had stopped at the Serpentine table a few feet away and were no longer looking at the Serpentine. The certificate of death, produced to me at Sandmere Court in September 1849, was signed by Cuthbert Rimmer, physician, of Deptford, said Nathaniel. That is on the face of the paper. Anybody may read it who cares to. There is a memorandum in Lord Sandmere's own hand of a payment of £200 against that name, dated 3 days before the identification was taken. His executors have the book. I have seen it. You are making a scene, said Stanmer, in a public building. I am reciting documents in a public building. Everyone is on a register or in a ledger, and I have not told you one thing a clerk with a shilling could not have found in a fortnight. That is what I came to say. You did not commit a clever crime, Aubrey. You committed an extremely expensive one in front of solicitors, and it has been sitting in open offices in 3 counties for 3 years, waiting for somebody to be sufficiently annoyed to go and look. There were perhaps a dozen people now. That was the thing about the exhibition. There were always a dozen people from everywhere, and they went home and told it. And the last item is not on any register, Nathaniel said. So I shall have to ask you to confirm it. In April of 1843, you made an offer of marriage to Lady Rosamond Carew in her father's drawing room, with her father's encouragement, and she refused you. And you went and stood at the window for a long while before rejoining the company. Stanmer's chin came up half an inch. It was the only thing that happened in his face, and it was enough. That is what this was, said Nathaniel, not the estate. You have 4,000 a year of your own, and you have never once been extravagant. 8 years, and an earl's debts, and a physician, and a widow's roof, and 5 years of a woman's life because a girl of 20 was witty at you in a drawing room, and you have never been able to put it down. He folded the paper he had not opened and put it back in his coat. I am told the Michaelmas session sits from Thursday week, he said. Publish the letters. She has already sworn to the identification, and it is in Mr. Sowerby's hands, and she did it before you asked her to, and not after. You have nothing left to hold over anybody, and I would rather you found that out here than in front of a judge. He went. He got as far as the elms before his hands began to shake, and he stood there for a while with a great many people going past him in both directions. Rosamond was in the mineral court with Ambrose. They had come up on the Saturday, and she had brought the boys because Augusta had insisted in a letter of 1 line that no child of that family was going to be in London during that autumn and not see the thing. Ambrose had been at the Serpentine table for a quarter of an hour and had not moved. The man in charge of the stand was from Penzance and was bored, and he had watched the boy look at the polished pillar from 4 different angles, and had eventually come round the table and asked him what he thought he was doing. It goes darker where it is thicker, said Ambrose, but not everywhere. There is a piece by your hand that is thin and dark. The man looked at the piece by his hand. Then he picked out a small oval from the heap, polished on both sides, and about the size of a hen's egg, green with a red vein through it off-center, and put it into the boy's palm, and closed his fingers over it, and told him it was the lizard, and that the Queen had bought some in May. Ambrose carried it in his hand the whole way back to Hill Street, and did not put it down at dinner, and that night, for the first time since the 6th of September, he opened the sketchbook. Silas Tench came to Everard Sowerby's chambers on the 17th of October and made a statement that took 3 hours. He came for 3 reasons, and Sowerby, who had expected 2 of them, wrote all 3 down. The first was that Lord Stanmer was a year in arrear of his fees, having paid nothing since the previous November, on the settled principle that a man in Tench's line does not sue. The second was an undertaking, offered on instructions, that no civil proceeding would be brought against him personally by the Duke of Renmore in respect of anything disclosed. The third was that on the 14th of October, the day after the exhibition, 2 solicitors' offices in the city, who had used him for 9 years, had written within 4 hours of each other to say they would not be, requiring him further, and by the Friday there were 5. Silas Tench was 44 and had a wife and a house in Camberwell, and he had understood the shape of it within a day. He gave them the leaves. He had not burned them. He had cut them out with a farrier's knife in a back room at Springfield in November 1848 and carried them to London in his pocketbook and never destroyed them. Because in 9 years he had learned that the thing a client wants gone is the thing that eventually keeps you. 2 leaves, sewn edges ragged, in a shilling ledger's ruled hand. The 14th day of November 1844. Nathaniel Ellsworth of Renmore in the county of Wilts, and Rosamund Carew of Sandmere in the county of Berks, declared before me man and wife. Witness E. Murgatroyd. Witness Jory Tregarthen, his mark being unnecessary, he having written the same. Elspeth Murgatroyd withdrew her affidavit on the 23rd by an instrument sworn at Dumfries, in which she stated that she had made the former one, at the request of a gentleman who had explained the matter to her, that she was 81 years of age and had not read it, and that she now recalled the evening in question perfectly well and had recalled it at the time. The court sat on the 28th of October. It went quickly, in the way things do when they have taken 4 months to become inevitable. The Reverend Headley Pierce, age 71, of Redruth, deposed that he had been a Wesleyan itinerant in that district for 39 years, that he had read letters aloud to Loveday Tregarthen of Porthgowan on many occasions between 1,845 and 1,849 because she could not read, and that he remembered the letter of March 1,845 in particular, and could give its substance, and had remembered it for 6 years, because it was the most remarkable thing he had ever been asked to read to anybody. The hand was compared with the wages book of the Sandmere Court stables for the years 1,843 and 1,844, which had been sold with the furniture and bought back for £4. Lady Cordelia Carew was heard on the second day and swore first to the identification of 1,849 and to everything that surrounded it, without being asked to and before anything else, and then to a parlor at Springfield in November 1,844, and a candle she had held because they had not lit the second lamp. Lord Stanmer published the letters on the 30th, in 2 papers, exactly as he had said he would. They were read everywhere, and they did to Cordelia's life precisely what she had told her sister in a Cornish lane that they would do. And she sat through the whole of the last day of the cause with her hands in her lap, and did not once look at the reporter's bench. The judge delivered himself on the 31st. He held first that the discontinuance of the 12th of September had been procured by the fraudulent acts of the intervener, particularized as the removal of the register, the procuring of a false affidavit, and the procuring in 1,849 of a false certificate of death, that the court would not permit its own process to be used as the instrument of such a design, and that the promovent was accordingly at liberty to proceed. He held upon the evidence of the register leaves, the letter of March 1,845, the testimony of the Reverend Headley Pierce and of Lady Cordelia Carew, and the withdrawal of the affidavit of Elspeth Murgatroyd, that a marriage by declaration de presenti had been contracted between the parties at Springfield in the county of Dumfries on the 14th day of November 1,844, valid by the law of Scotland and recognized by the law of England. He pronounced for the validity of the marriage. He declared Edwin Ellsworth and Ambrose Ellsworth, born the 12th of June 1,847, to be the lawful issue thereof. He condemned the intervener in the costs of the suit. Rosamund heard the name go down onto the record, Ellsworth, both of them, in a clerk's flat voice, in a room with a red-robed judge in it, and found that her eyes had gone hot, and that she was not going to be able to prevent it. And Augusta Ellsworth's hand closed round her wrist for the second time in 2 months, and stayed there. And at the same moment, in the same sentence, Rosamund Carew ceased to have any right whatever in her own sons. She knew it. She had known it since a steward's room in Berkshire in July. She sat in the Court of Arches with her sister on one side and her husband's mother on the other, and understood that the two boys who were at that moment in Hill Street, being minded by a housemaid, had, in the last half-minute, become in law the property of a man's discretion. Nathaniel stood up. Sowerby half rose to stop him, and then did not. "My lord, I ask leave to hand in an instrument." The judge, who was gathering his papers, looked up over his glasses with the expression of a man who has pronounced and would like his luncheon. "The cause is concluded, your grace." "It is, my lord." "This is not part of the cause. It is a deed executed by me this morning, and I ask that it be read and entered, and I ask it in open court and not in a registry, because I want it read aloud in the hearing of the persons in this room." There was a pause of some seconds. Then the judge said that the court would hear it, and the clerk took the paper and stood up and read it out. It was not long. Sowerby had told him it would not bind him, and had told him so twice in writing, and he had had it drawn anyway. And it recited that the Duke of Renmore, being this day declared the lawful father of Edwin and Ambrose Ellsworth, did renounce, absolutely, and during the whole of his life, the exercise of every right of custody, control, residence, education, and religion vested in him by law over the said children, that the whole of such care should be exercised by their mother alone, that he made no reservation and asked no condition, and that he desired the instrument to stand upon the record of the court, so that it might be produced against him by anybody, at any time, in any proceeding, including one brought by himself. The clerk sat down. Nathaniel turned round. He did not address the judge, and he did not address the court, and the reporters wrote it down anyway, and it was in the papers on the Monday, in 4 versions, none of them quite right. "They were always yours first," he said. "I am asking to be second, not instead." They were blessed in the parish church above Porthgowan on the 6th of December, on a morning when the sky was the particular pale silver that made that coast look like a painting of itself. It was not a wedding. They had been married 7 years and 1 month, and the record said so now. And the curate, who had looked the position up in 3 books and written to his rural dean about it, had settled on a service of thanksgiving, and had privately told his wife it was the most interesting thing that had happened to him since ordination. Rosamond found she preferred it to a wedding. A wedding would have been a thing done to her. This was an account of something that had already happened, and had happened because 2 people of 20 and 25 once stood in front of a fire and said so. Loveday Tregurthan wept without apologizing to anybody. Jago Nancaro did not weep, but he took both their hands afterward in the churchyard and gripped so hard and so long that it came to the same thing, and then said something about the weather. Elias Verrall read 6 verses. Cordelia stood on her sister's left, which had been argued about for a week and settled by Augusta, who said that if the girl was to be ruined, she might as well be ruined standing somewhere sensible. Ned wore his best clothes for 9 minutes and then acquired a streak of mud of unclear origin down one side, which everybody had privately been timing. Ambrose, who had asked the evening before whether being blessed meant they had to leave Porthgowan, had been told they would divide the year Wiltshire when Parliament sat, Cornwall when they chose, and his mother decided where home was and had considered this with his customary thoroughness, and asked whether the governor could come. The governor, Nathaniel said carefully, lived outside, and that would not be changing. Ambrose accepted this as satisfactory. The vestry wrote to her in January. It was 4 lines long, drafted by the churchwarden and rewritten twice by Verrall, and it regretted the resolution of the 9th of September and invited Mrs. Pascoe to resume the charge of the school. Rosamond replied that she would, on 3 conditions: that the letter be entered in the vestry minutes in full, next to the resolution; that the school take 12 children from the mine cottages at Gorin who were not on the parish and had been refused twice, and that the name on the schoolroom door remained R. Pascoe, because that was the name the children had learned to read under, and she had not the least intention of losing it. All three were agreed. Aubrey Ellsworth paid the costs of the suit, which were considerable, and went abroad in the spring, and did not come back for 9 years. Cordelia went to Florence in February. She wrote every month, unfailingly, long letters about pictures and about her aunt's appalling household management, and she did not come home. And it was 4 years before either sister wrote anything in one of them that could not have been read aloud at a table. Jory Tregarthen's answer came in August 1852, 17 months after the letter went out to Adelaide. He had walked to Ballarat with 4 other men from the borough and had not been killed, and he had a claim and a partner and no intention of coming home. Mr. Sowerby's clerk had sent him a full account of the cause, in which he had turned out to be the second most important man in England. His reply to it ran to 12 lines and was mostly about his mother's roof. The polished piece of serpentine sat on the window ledge of the cottage above the harbor, and was still there long after everybody who had been in the church that December was dead. Years afterward, when the story of their birth had become the kind of thing that gets told at family dinners to people who were not there, the two of them were asked separately what they remembered. Ambrose said that he remembered a very tall man coming into a kitchen and kneeling down on the flagstones, which no adult ever did, so that his face was level with a boy's face. He remembered being asked nothing. He remembered showing the man a drawing of the harbor, and the man looking at it for a long time, much longer than people looked at drawings, which was about 3 seconds, and then saying that he saw things very clearly. It was, Ambrose said, the truest thing anybody had ever said to him, and he had known from that afternoon that the man intended to stay. Ned said it was the laugh, the real one, in Mrs. Tregarthen's kitchen that had come out of the man sideways and unprepared, and had knocked him half off his balance so that he had put a hand down on the floor. Everything else can be practiced, Ned said. You can practice being kind, and a great many people do. You cannot practice that. And Rosamond, who had once pressed both her hands flat against the inside of a cottage door and stood in the dark for a long time, and who had built a life out of salt and silence and the daily love of 2 gray-eyed boys, heard her son say it and thought that he was right. Below the window the tide was going out. It would come back at 10. Ambrose had established the depths in the spring of 1851 on 4 separate days, in stone courses above the water, and had ruled a margin on the back of the page and written at the bottom of it that it was not the same every day, and he did not know why yet. He found out why eventually. The sea went on doing what the sea does.